football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam. This is actually my first live show, first ever live show on my new computer. So I still have my Alienware laptop. I love that thing to death. It's had a good long life. In fact, it's still open on my bed. So maybe by the end of the stream, it'll die and I'll have to, plug it back in and whatever. It's just sitting there open because I had to transition some things over from that laptop to this new desktop that I got, which is way more powerful, handles streaming better, the quality of streaming, and just everything should work more smoothly with this than with that computer, which was really good, but couldn't exactly handle everything. But we're good. We're here. Had some things last minute to do today before we got live, but we're going to talk about a lot of different things outside of just the first round games in the college football playoff because those are important. Wait, has it not? Why isn't it going live yet? Am I live, guys? Oh, apparently I am live. Okay, I was confused for a minute there. I'm confused. I don't know why, but yeah. Okay, good. Again, new setup. The OBS app apparently had some new updates that have really nice features, so I can go live from the OBS app without having to go even into YouTube Studio, which is nice. So it's a lot of new things, a lot of changes, but it's fantastic. It's wonderful. I feel great. Honestly, this is the best I felt in a while. Last week we didn't go live all that much in part because of some of the new changes, and I wanted to redo my schedule. So we're live now, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern time. With the end of the regular season, with the only games being left to preview are some bowl games and college football playoff games, I'm kind of leaning into preseason mode now. We're still going to do a ton of topics per stream, and the streams will be anywhere from 2 to 2.5 hours is really my goal. But yeah, we'll only be doing it 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon, depending on the, college football playoff days and times, because I think on one of the days, I think maybe like Wednesday around New Year's when the quarterfinals are played, I think on one of those planned live shows there would be a game. So we'd probably move that show a day up or a day behind, but we'll keep you updated as always. Make sure everyone to like, to subscribe, to hit the notification bell, to like, and to just come in, hang out, chill out, and listen to awesome college football analysis. It's my goal to make sure that all of you are the best and most knowledgeable college football fans possible. I do want to start off this show by taking a look at the first round games. And I think the best place to start off would be looking at Alabama traveling to Oklahoma in a rematch from the regular season. I think that would be the best place to start. It is the first of the first round games taking place on Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern time on ABC in Norman, Oklahoma. What makes Alabama versus Oklahoma so interesting is that in the first game of this series, a lot of people find rematches to be boring, but I think this specific rematch is very intriguing because in the first matchup, Alabama statistically dominated the Sooners in Bryant-Denny Stadium, and yet they lost 23-21 in a game that was really not all that close statistically, but it ended up being a close Oklahoma 23-21 win because of stellar defense and great special teams and Alabama struggling on special teams. And I think a Oklahoma team that is just more specialized than Alabama, and because Oklahoma was able to play to their specialties, defense, special teams, forcing turnovers, and Alabama can't run the football to save their life. Their defense is great, but is it elite? No. So it'd be one thing if they had Ohio State's defense or Texas Tech's or Indiana's, and they had that many backbreaking turnovers. They probably wouldn't have allowed Oklahoma to score as many points as they did off of those turnovers. But that's not Alabama. That's not their defense. It is one of the top defenses in college football, but it is not at the top. And with how their offense functions, when they turn over the football, that's when the fun begins for their opponents. And you see that here, where Alabama nearly doubled them up in yards. Rushing yards were about equal. Mateer had a key scramble. Alabama threw a very critical pick six. Oklahoma made their field goals. Alabama missed their field goals. And that was the difference in this game. Alabama nearly doubled up Oklahoma in first downs too, but they missed on a fourth down. Third down conversions weren't good for either side. Oklahoma got pressure. Oklahoma forced turnovers. That was the story of this game, was the Oklahoma defense and the Oklahoma special teams unit coming in to Tuscaloosa and beating the ever-living crap out of that Alabama offensive line, confusing Ty Simpson, and just holding on for dear life through a hurricane to come out on top. And that was a career and program-defining win for Oklahoma. Because, and people have been critical of this, Oklahoma fans were asking, what are you talking about, Sam? Oklahoma is a fantastic program. Yes, it is. It's a blue blood. But look at the analytics here. Oklahoma's offense is horrific by SEC standards, by Power 4 standards. It is one of the least productive offenses in the Power 4. Their defense is fourth. Their special teams is second. They are a top 15 team in FPI, like fringe about there. Top 10 in game control, top 15 in efficiency. They are solidly a top 15 football team. They are not yet up to the standard that Brent Venables and their general manager, Nagy, want them to be at. They are not playing to that blue blood national title contender standard. This Oklahoma team is not as good as half of the teams Lincoln Riley fielded for a variety of reasons. Some portal related, some things related to the new era of college football that Brent Venables can't control, but other things that are just like plainly, yeah, you would take almost any of Lincoln Riley's Oklahoma teams over this Oklahoma team in this current era. You would, because they were better, they were deeper. Not all of them, but I know for a fact 2017 and probably 2020 and at least one of, if not both of the 18 and 19 teams, you would. They needed a win like that to get back to where they want to be, where they are a true national title contender and not just a playoff contender. That was a huge win, where they could win their way and show the world that they're not the next Nebraska, that they can actually do something of significance in the SEC. For Alabama, they are analytically the superior team. They are higher in FPI. Game control, they're about the same. Efficiency, they're about the same. But they have the more balanced team with an offense that I would say is good and great when healthy and functioning properly, and a defense that has been improving in every game this season. The biggest non-negotiable here, once again, is Oklahoma's defense. They're sixth in points allowed per play. They have several All-Americans and NFL players on that side of the football. And in many advanced analytics, they have the top defense in America, or one of the top defenses in America. You got Texas Tech, Ohio State, Indiana, Oklahoma is one of those teams that's bordering on that next tier of defenses. And I would say they have, in a lot of ways, the coaching and the players of those defenses that I would consider the top three. Last game was really an epitome of Alabama's issues, because we knew that Oklahoma was limited, and we thought that Alabama was limited, but we didn't know quite as much whether or not they were. Turns out, though they were limited, for sure, if their quarterback play is not great, they cannot win. And that is a big weakness because, yes, you usually need high-end quarterback play to win and win at a high level. But the best of teams can win or come close to winning when their quarterback is making mistakes and imperfect. Think about the Ohio State team in 2024. Or I think what is more in line with that example is the Michigan team the prior year or the Georgia teams before that. Think about 2015 Alabama with Jake Coker. They won it all and were pretty dominant. Think about 2016 Alabama with Jalen Hurts. Nearly won it all, were super dominant. They did it with an elite defense here. This is not one of those Saban Alabama teams where they can win sometimes in spite of their quarterback, or like some of those great teams. That's not what this Alabama squad is at all. They are a good team. They have a good quarterback, but everything runs through the quarterback because they don't have a rushing offense. Mateer, meanwhile, arguably is half of Oklahoma's rushing offense. His passing capabilities have been very limited all year, especially after his injury, and I don't think the Red River shootout and that loss to Texas where he just kept getting hit helped either. Hopefully in this game, he's had long enough of a rest to somewhat recover, and we get a better version of him than we've had for much of the year. Same thing with Alabama as their injuries have piled up as the season's gone on. And that's a perfect point to talk about some key players that I think will have an impact on this game, or they will need to play at a different level than they have to bring an Alabama victory. So I'm paying attention to defensive end Yanze Pierre, safety Bray Hubbard, cornerback Zabian Brown, and then the receivers, Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton. Now, Ryan Williams has been inconsistent. I didn't bring him up here because he's been inconsistent all season long, but we also know he has a high upside. I think he just kind of is who he is this year. Bernard has quietly been wide receiver 1 for Alabama, and there's an argument that Isaiah Horton is wide receiver 2. They are going to need all hands on deck here, and they are going to need to operate well in space. They are going to need to create missed tackles, yards after catch. They are going to need to attack downfield and have chemistry with their quarterback. Because Simpson, whether it was Georgia in the SEC championship game, whether it was against Oklahoma in that fateful night in November, or Auburn, he has been, missing his athletes week over week over week. It's been quite dreadful, if I'm being honest. It's been bad. It's not just that he's occasionally behind his receiver. He's almost always a second behind. And not saying he's a bad quarterback overall, but his play it's been bad. When you're always behind at some point, you got to find a way to fix that, because that will turn a touchdown on say a slant route that your speedy receiver takes for 70 yards and you score. That can be turned into a pick six, especially against the higher quality defenses where if you're going to beat them, you have to lead your receiver to the football and you just have to take an inch or two of separation and turn it into something. But if you're a few inches behind, you're throwing right to the defender. I didn't mention Simpson here because we already talk about the quarterbacks, especially for all of these big games. But it's also important that the wide receivers can help him compensate, or if they don't trust him to attack downfield, that they can create some missed tackles in space when, they catch the ball around the line of scrimmage or just very short, easy dump-off routes. The secondary is going to have to tackle well, and they're probably going to have to create some turnovers of their own against John Mateer. For Oklahoma, it's all about keeping Mateer comfortable, because if Oklahoma loses the turnover battle here, maybe they could win with how battered and banged up Alabama has been, but I don't really know about that. And their offense is already dreadful as is. So I'm looking at left tackle Michael Fasusi to try to protect John Mateer. I'm looking at Isaiah Satenya III to be their lone producer on offense, who nearly has 1,000 yards receiving and will probably get 1,000 yards receiving after this game. And on defense, looking at Dominic Williams, R. Mason Thomas, and Kip Lewis to really, come forward and try to get pressure on Simpson, make him uncomfortable, and then the Oklahoma secondary can play a little bit of cleanup and mop-up duty. Keys to this game: passing offense, tackling, overall quarterback play, turnovers, and pressure. The team who gets the most pressure here is going to win, because both of these quarterbacks under duress, it's the case with every quarterback. Every quarterback under pressure, when they're actually pressured, plays worse. But some play far worse, and others play just worse. I think of Fernando Mendoza. He plays worse, but about as you'd expect. He goes from elite to just great under pressure, where you put him under pressure, he's good for a turnover per game under pressure, but then he will more than make up for it with an amazing drive or several amazing throws, for example. And sometimes even under pressure, he doesn't fold or doesn't turn it over at all. I think of, I think of another quarterback under pressure. I guess I would say Jaden Maiava. Like, under pressure, plays good, not fantastic. It's hard to play fantastic under pressure. You can't do that all the time, but his drop-off isn't huge. Simpson and Mateer under duress, I would say especially Simpson. Mateer has enough moxie, mobility, and pocket awareness to, make some amazing things happen when you least expect it. But when they're put on the spot under pressure, they will heave it into traffic and make terrible mistakes. Passing offense all ties into that too. With tackling, I just think that Alabama and Oklahoma have enough athletes at receiver to where if they just miss one tackle, there could be a big game-breaking play that really decides the game. This is a game that's going to be so close that I think one play could decide it. That's why the spread is only Alabama minus 1.5. When I pay attention to this matchup, I keep coming back to the fact that while I think Alabama's roster is better, and while I do think that DeBoer is a better coach than Brent Venables, I do think this is a tough matchup for Alabama. And it is hard to beat a good team twice, but it's easier when the first time you beat them, you play at their place. And now, that opponent, who is more injured than they were then, might be a little bit broken, and you're healthier than you were when you played them. You're now the home team. You're now the host. And you've actually had a longer time to prepare because you didn't play in the SEC championship game and suffer more injuries there. That was basically a bye. So in this spot, I like Oklahoma to win outright and cover that 1.5 point spread. The Sooners defense is going to suffocate a banged up Alabama offense. That's where I'm going with this. Alabama is, look, they're ranked 9th. They're power rated top 10 in FPI. They're only a 1.5 point favorite. They very easily could win, but defense wins championships. And while I do not think Oklahoma is a national championship contender and consequently they won't win at all, I do believe that because of their defense and Venables' coaching and the fact that Mateer will probably play one of his better games due to being healthy, and Oklahoma having faced this offense before and really dissecting it, I think the matchups favor Oklahoma, the situation favors Oklahoma, and they will be playing in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena in the quarterfinals against the 1 seed, the Indiana Hoosiers, which is absolutely fantastic. Again, one of the greater stories of college football is Indiana's rise, and Oklahoma kind of re-emerging as once again a better team that is a playoff contender. You kind of got a story of redemption in Oklahoma and a wow, history-making story with Indiana. Another matchup that is historic for a variety of reasons is Miami and Texas A&M. This is going to be a fantastic game because of the perceptions versus the reality here. We have a lines of scrimmage brawl between 10-2 Miami and 11-1 Texas A&M. Both are ranked inside the top 10, Miami 10th, Texas A&M 7th. The Aggies are a 3.5-point favorite, and talk about some of the best pass rushers in college football with Cassius Howell and Reuben Bain Jr., and some of the best offensive tackles in college football with Trezon III, Demetrius Crownover, Francis Mauigoa, and to circle back to pass rush, I do not want to forget about Akeem Mesidor for Miami. We have fantastic offensive line and defensive line play here. Saturday, noon Eastern time. It's going to be a little bit chilly in Aggie land, but overall pretty good weather in the 60s. These teams last played each other in 2023 in Miami, the final year of Jimbo Fisher, second year of Mario Cristobal. Miami handled A&M, then went on to go 7-6, and Texas A&M that year, I believe, finished 7-6 as well. Yes, they did. They lost their bowl game, went 7-5 regular season. It's all coming back to me now. That matchup at the time was believed by many to be a premier matchup between two rising programs. Turned out it was just between two 7-6 football teams. Now, fast forward, and Miami's making a trip back to Aggie land, which they did in 2022, when, again, Miami and Texas A&M were highly ranked, or at least were in the preseason highly ranked. And now they actually are that good, as many expected them to be in 22 and 23. They are actually a high-quality football team. Now, both the Aggies and the Hurricanes are. You see it in the power ratings, in the metrics. You see it with the film, the size and speed that these athletes and players have. Mike Elko has done a phenomenal job changing the culture and trajectory of A&M from one of being a laughingstock to a serious national title contender in the future. Mario Cristobal has turned Miami from a school of finesse and clownery and always being in trouble with the NCAA and always being in trouble with a coaching search and trying to find a new coach to one of stability, of physicality, of strength, and of elite development. What a turnaround for both of these programs, where for most of the 2010s and parts of the 2020s, they were a joke. Now they are taken seriously. And it's funny how just one thing can change perceptions, right? Where if Notre Dame gets in over Miami, people are making fun of Miami for never making the playoffs under Cristobal, but people, whether subconsciously or consciously, are going to choose to take Miami more seriously for getting in over Notre Dame when, even if they got snubbed out, they'd have the exact same record and resume. It's interesting how that works. By no means do I think that Miami's regular season was an absolute success. It wasn't a total failure, but ideally you would have wanted to go 11-1 with that schedule. That's what A&M did, but they have a losing streak of 1 right now, losing the Lone Star Showdown in dominant fashion to their rival, the Texas Longhorns. So this is a big game for both of these teams, an opportunity for a program victory here. Miami has one of the best defenses in the land. Top 10 in efficiency, top 10 in points allowed per play. Offensively, both teams are in the top 20. A&M's defense is 14th in efficiency. They allow a ton of points per play. They have weaknesses giving up explosive plays, and their defense is not really all that sound, but it is good enough that paired with their offense, they can cause damage and they can win close games, and they are well coached. And both of these teams are very talented, to say the least. I mean, when you're Miami, and think about last year, your defense was outside the top 50 in most major categories. You are now 7th in points allowed per play, only allowing 0.226 points per play. You are 6th in defensive efficiency. You are 7th in FPI, 6th in game control, 8th in overall efficiency. Indiana is one of the only teams in the present top 10 that actually improved from last year to this year. These two are other teams that are in that same boat, where A&M is obviously better than they were last year. And I think Miami is too, or at least in the same ballpark, but because of their defense, I think they are better built to compete for titles now than they were last year. The quarterback matchup is particularly interesting to me because in many ways I think these players are the exact same. I mean, look, 25 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 8.7 yards per attempt for both. Both are around 3,000 yards. Beck has a much higher completion percentage than Marcel Reed, but I think that Reed somewhat makes up with that with his ability to run the football that Beck just doesn't quite have. And both are top 15 in QBR, but not quite top 10. And both have the capability of messing everything up for their teams or making the game. High upside, very low floor. What will determine this game, outside of line of scrimmage play, I think that's number one. Number two is whichever quarterback makes more dumb decisions. For Carson Beck, it's making sure that you don't turn into Timmy from South Park. Just, as my friend Baldfather Betts has mentioned, and I think that's a beautiful analogy, just do not turn into the pick throwing machine. Don't do it. And for Marcel Reed, don't try to play Superman. Don't do it. Because against this defense, you will be eaten alive. This is the best defense per advanced analytics that Texas A&M has played all season long. Even better than Texas, even better than Notre Dame, and obviously everyone else. This is the best defense that you have faced. So keep that in mind. Both of these quarterbacks are turnover prone. They also can make wow throws. For the Hurricanes, the visiting team, some key players that I'm looking out for. Francis Mauigoa at offensive tackle. Wide receiver Malachi Toney, a wonderful true freshman All-American. Look out for the defensive ends, Ruben Bain Jr. and Akeem Mesidor, and also the defensive tackles, David Blay and Armando Blount. And at corner, O.J. Frederick Jr. was injured. Looks like he's going to be coming back into the fold, and he was a stud last year, has been serviceable and good this year. I think that Miami's secondary could use a healthy stud corner, and it's a good thing that he is back and healthy here. Toney nearly has 1,000 receiving yards. He's their best receiver on the team by a mile. Mauigoa is probably the best offensive tackle in college football, or very close to that. Ruben Bain Jr. is the best defensive end in football, or again, very close to that. And Mesidor is up there too. I mean, when you between them, you have 102 pressures and 15 sacks per PFF. They are the anchor of this defense, of Corey Heatherman's unit that has had a quick turnaround in 1 year. And they'll lose a good amount entering next year, but just imagine what this defense could be in year 2 of Corey Heatherman's system. Just imagine what that could be. For the Hurricanes, it is key to get pressure on Marcel Reed. And even though A&M's offensive line is highly praised, as they should be, I think you have a trench edge with your D-line over their offensive line. For A&M, it's making sure that what I just said is completely factually inaccurate. With Trezon III and Demetrius Crownover, that's possible. This is one of the best tackle duos in college football, and they are going to need to provide a clean pocket for Marcel Reed. The interior is going to need to hold their ground so he can step up in the pocket and make throws and be able to hit Mario Craver, Casey Conception, Terry Bussey, and any of their other receivers like tight end Nate Borkacher maybe down the field and target the weakness of Miami on defense, which is their secondary. Cassius Howell is one of the few defensive ends in college football that could potentially start at Miami. 40 pressures, 12 sacks per PFF, and you got linebackers Tareen York and Damian Sanford as well. Both of these teams, bit sketchy in the secondary, better up front. It's also similar with how their offense works. There are a lot of similarities with these teams, though there also are plenty of differences. And that's ultimately why I keep coming back to the trenches here, because that's where both of these teams want to be. I think that A&M uses their trenches in more of a finesse way, Miami more of a physical way. Miami loves to run inside of the tackles, for example. They did that a ton last year. They've done it a ton this year. They're all about power running. A&M likes more explosive plays on offense. Miami is much more methodical, chewing clock, keeping the opposing offense off the field. Miami's defense is much more about making sure they can get off the field and keep everything in front of them. A&M's defense is very boom or bust, it seems like, where they either get a big play or a 3 and out, or they give up a big play, for example. But trench warfare could be pretty equal here because both lines of scrimmage are pretty good. So then that all distills down to quarterback play. And, which version of Reed and which version of Beck show up. Beyond that, it relates more back to trench play, but you can include the running backs with power rushing, the pass rush with how the defensive coordinators handle the opposing quarterbacks and offensive lines protection schemes, and who makes bigger plays in the secondary, who can come up with a clutch interception, a pass deflection, who can show more awareness as to where the ball is, and who can put himself in a better position to make a play. Is that the Miami defender or the Texas A&M defender? Where I lean here is in an equal matchup where both teams have a pretty even playing field. I look at home field advantage and I look at the trenches and also coaching. So coaching and home field advantage go to A&M in terms of head coach. I think Elko is a much better game manager and a superior coach to Cristobal. But I also think that Miami has the better coordinator duo with Corey Heatherman and Shannon Dawson. Shannon Dawson, I think, is equivalent or better than Colin Klein, and I think Heatherman is better than Mike Elko when Elko is splitting duties between defensive coordinator and head coach. The overall quality of team, I would lean with Miami. I think they have the better athletes. I think they're deeper, and they're closer to where they want to be, which makes sense. They're in year 4 of their build. A&M is in year 2. And for a roster matchup perspective, there is one area where I think one team is a decisive edge, and that is Miami's rush defense against A&M's rush offense. I like what A&M's rushing offense does, but I think it's a poor matchup for what Miami wants to do defensively. Meanwhile, while Miami in theory has a pretty porous rushing offense on paper, I think that with enough game planning and with their ability to consistently get 2, 3, 4 yards, they just don't get much beyond that, that they can stay ahead of the chains enough to keep A&M's offense off the field and really make them do things that they do not want to do. So I am going with Miami here to be the first team in college football playoff history, the 12-team playoff, maybe a very short era, to be the first road team to win a first-round game. I think they are the better team. I think they will win at lines of scrimmage, and they have the better athletes. I think that Beck, similar enough to Marcel Reed, and with that experience, I think that experience where he's been at Georgia, he has been in more of these big games, and I think, he's older. He's more of a vet. I think that can come into play if the line of scrimmage is equal as well. I know he could also mess it up, but so could Marcel Reed. So I like Miami in this spot, not just to cover, but I also like them to win outright, and they will be advancing to play Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl, in a rematch of the 2002 Fiesta Bowl and Miami's last national championship game appearance. That's going to be a wonderful game, by the way. You bet that is going to be a absolutely wonderful game. It's going to be incredible, where, those two programs, they don't like each other, and understandably so. They hate each other. They loathe each other. And it's just going to be so good. So good seeing a historic matchup take place again. That's going to be absolutely incredible. Let me pull up a super chat before we resume here. Let me just pull up the pop-out chat. We did get a $2 super chat. If any of you want me to respond to something you have to say, please just send in a super chat by all means, and we will get to it. I do have limited time today. I don't really want to go past 3 or maybe 3:15, so I'll only be answering super chats here. But Thank you all for coming in. Thank you to my moderators, Moody Meatball. Thank you to Evan414 for being a member. Thank you to Hoosier Ish for coming in, being involved in the chat. For Chuck for being involved in the chat. Nathan, and also ZEH Sackett, Oregon fan. Thank you all for being involved. I will shout you out. As for the super chat here, as for that, going for gold, 8536. Thank you for the $2 super chat. I got here somewhat on time. Never happens. Well, I've rarely been live on time. Today, we were at least live less than an hour after I initially wanted to be. And I think this noon schedule is better than 6 p.m. It's also going to be better than 10 a.m. as well. It'll be much easier for me to be on time from here on out, and that is going to be awesome. So, yup, be here Monday, Wednesday, Friday, noon Eastern time. We'll be on time. We'll give you anywhere from 10 to 15 or 20 topics to digest, and it's going to be absolutely incredible. So thank you for that $2 super chat. Really appreciate it. If any of you have other things you want me to respond to and say, send in a super chat, can be any amount, and I will respond to it. Let's talk about Tulane and Ole Miss now. College football has 2 rematches in the playoffs this year. Oklahoma versus Alabama, and Tulane versus Ole Miss is the second one. So what went so wrong the first time? Well, what went wrong the first time is that Tulane had to play Ole Miss's game of passing the football, and they couldn't really run the way they wanted to. Meanwhile, Ole Miss could. Everything went Ole Miss's way, where they just got up early, played their style of game. It was at home in Oxford. It was a game that I don't think Ole Miss was overlooking because many people were circling Tulane there. And boom, you nearly get doubled up in yardage. You get basically tripled in passing yards. And one of your strengths, if you're Tulane, is running the ball. And Ole Miss did that better than you did. Both were even in takeaways, pretty even in penalties. Tulane was also 0 of 3 on third down, so that really sucks and doesn't help either. Ole Miss is now 6th. They're 11-1. Tulane is 11th at 11-2. Mississippi's favored by about 17.5, 16.5 here. This is going to be the 3:30 game. I think Oxford's going to be amped up for this. It's a pretty big spread, too, for a game that was a 35-point win for Ole Miss last time, but that could have gone differently. And keep in mind, while most of Ole Miss's staff here is in theory intact, they are going to be focusing on other things. We don't know the state of these players, and Pete Golding is a much different coach than Lane Kiffin. You can probably already see where I'm going with this, but you also don't know where I'm going with this, so please stick around. Ole Miss is a great offense paired with an average to below average defense. Tulane is kind of, by Power 4 standards, mediocre at both. Average. They're kind of an average below average Power 4 team, I would say. So one of the best, if not possibly the best, group of 5, group of 6 teams. They were top 40 in points per play and points allowed per play. Ole Miss is top 40 in points allowed per play, but top 20 in points per play. Both teams run the ball similarly, about 4.6, 4.7 yards per carry. Tulane is much better at run defense. Ole Miss is just better at pass defense and also pass offense. If you are Tulane, you want to go back to just being really, really tough and gritty and making this a game that Ole Miss has to grind out to win. That's why I think Jake Retzlaff, especially his legs, but also Javon Gordon and Jamari McClure are your key players offensively. It's all about the rushing attack. And for the defense, it's about Santana Hopper and Harvey Dyson and Sam Howard, that front, making sure that Ole Miss's quarterback is under pressure, that you are spying Chambliss and don't let him get downfield, and that you make it so that they have to go to a quick game and turn the pass into an extension of the run. For the Rebels, Trinidad Chambliss and Kilwan Lacey need to make something out of nothing, and Chambliss needs to connect with his receivers downfield, whether that be Caden Lee or DeJean Stribling. And defensively, you got defensive tackle Xavier Harris, DN Cam Franklin, and corner Antonio Kite. Just make sure that you don't allow big plays to happen, that you don't let Tulane break off any big runs, that you try to keep them behind the chains occasionally enough to where Retzlaff has to throw. And Retzlaff is not an accurate passer. We saw this at BYU, and we have seen it plenty of times this year with Tulane as well. Speaking of that, Retzlaff only completes 62.4% of his passes, and he's playing against a quarterback in Trinidad Chambliss that is 5th in QBR, 17th in passer rating, has 18 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions, has over 3,000 passing yards, is top 15 in yards per pass attempt, and has good legs, too, and can run a zone read and run it rather well. Retzlaff can, too, but his QBR and passer rating is lower despite facing worse competition here. With the Green Wave, again, you want to make this a physical game. And if you're Ole Miss, you want to make this a finesse game. Another question here is whether or not the talent is going to be overwhelming, because Ole Miss does have more talented players. They're an SEC team. Tulane is an American team. Those are very, very different conferences. I don't think Tulane would play Georgia within 8 points the way that Ole Miss did. The want it factor is key here, because think about it. Summerall is going to go to Florida. He's gone after Tulane's knocked out of the playoffs. Much of Ole Miss's offensive staff and possibly roster will be gone after they are knocked out of the playoffs. So, which team wants it more is actually a big factor here. For Alabama, Oklahoma, and for A&M Miami, we know both of those teams want that game. I think we also know that for James Madison and Oregon. I know that Chesney is going to UCLA, so maybe that's a question with JMU. But JMU profiles is better than Tulane, and Dan Lanning's not going anywhere last time I checked. So that's a little bit different here. But with both coaches moving to destinations, Kiffin is already at LSU. That's a big loss. Summerall will go to Florida. The want it factor will be a question here. There's also a talent factor. The quarterback run will be a big thing here, and rush offense and rush defense will determine things too. Because we know that Ole Miss will beat Tulane through the air. What we do not know is if Ole Miss can do that through the ground. We don't. If they cannot, there's a very good chance that Tulane could actually be live here and pull off an upset. If it's same as last game, well then Tulane has absolutely no shot whatsoever. I do like some things that Tulane has. I think that Summerall's a better coach than Pete Golding. I think Tulane actually has an advantage on the ground here. I believe this game will be closer than it was last round. But I can't bring myself to pick a road G5 team to beat a home Power 4 team. I think that Tulane will keep it close. I think that Ole Miss will probably drop in power ratings after this game. I believe that Ole Miss will be very nervous to play Georgia after this game. But I think regardless of that, they will escape with a win. Ole Miss will win, and Tulane will cover for all the reasons we talked about. I just think Tulane is a bit too physical, too engaged, and now has a coaching edge to the point where this will be competitive, and really what wins the game for Ole Miss is their talent. Okay, now we can get to the final game, the night game. And this is an interesting night game, guys. And it's interesting because on one hand, you would expect Oregon to just roster James Madison. Because Oregon is infinitely more talented than Ole Miss, for context, from a blue chip ratio standpoint, even from a player standpoint. Like, when fully healthy, Oregon is probably better than Ole Miss in every way except for receiver. And that's actually pretty close. But James Madison analytically and statistically also profiles as way better. And I mean that too. Way better than Tulane. So I'm curious about this game in particular. For a night game where the visitor is a 21.5 point underdog, that's how many points Oregon is favored to beat James Madison by. That's the line for this game. There are intriguing factors here that make this a game that my eyeballs are going to be on. I will be paying close attention to James Madison traveling to Oregon, even with the 21.5-point spread, even with Oregon projected to blow this team out, because nothing is guaranteed. I think Bob Chesney is a wonderful coach. I also think Dan Lanning is a wonderful coach. And there are some matchups here that Oregon could totally blow up and exploit, but that James Madison could also hold on to as a way to keep this game competitive here. Look at some of these key metrics for both of these teams. So James Madison is 10th in defensive points per play allowed. They're 12th in offensive points per play. Oregon's top 10 in those categories. In terms of a G5 or G6 versus Power 4 matchup, this is the much higher quality G5 versus P4 game in comparison to Tulane and Ole Miss. Know that James Madison's played an easier schedule than Tulane. Oregon's actually played, I think, a tougher schedule than Ole Miss did. But this is the higher quality one of those two games where you have a G5 team as the visitor and a P4 team as the home team. When it comes to run defense and run offense, James Madison's top 10 in both. Oregon is first in yards per pass attempt allowed. They're top 10 in rushing offense, but outside the top 15 in rushing defense. And for James Madison, correction for myself, it's actually flipped. They're 12th in yards per carry, but they're third in yards per rush attempt allowed, only allowing 2.5 yards per carry. It's a pretty damn good rushing defense, if I do say so myself. For key players, it's all about the trenches for James Madison. It's all about their running backs and quarterback. That's it. You are not going to beat this Oregon team in a pass-first shootout. Similar story with Ole Miss Tulane, not the exact same matchup. I think Ole Miss, how it's currently constructed, if they had Kiffin, would probably have a better passing offense than Oregon, but still a far worse passing defense. And I do think that James Madison overall has a better passing offense than what Tulane provides. So it's not the exact same thing, but just due to talent reasons and how good Dante Moore has looked and how explosive that offense has been, even when Washington was able to limit their rushing offense, I do think that you want this to be a ground and pound game where both teams are getting pressure and it's all about line of scrimmage warfare, and you make it close enough to be able to come out on top and earn what would be a historic upset. Alonzo Barnett III, Wayne Knight, and center Zach Greenberg are the key players I'm paying attention to for James Madison's offense. Defensively, it's all about the pass rushers, Sahir West, Amar Thomas, and linebacker Trent Hendrick. Thomas and West are some of the better pass rushers in the entire G5, and with Oregon, they've had at times this year some inconsistencies in pass blocking. I think most of those have been fixed, but it has been something we've seen this year, so I'm curious to see if James Madison will get any pressure. And for Oregon, it's, Dante Moore, Kenyon Sadiq, whether or not DeCorian Moore is healthy, and if he isn't, who's wide receiver one? It's probably Malik Benson. Defensively, Bear Alexander, Jaden Kannady, and Tatum Tuioti are who I'm paying attention to for the Ducks here. Dante Moore's been a really good quarterback. And he's been inconsistent at times, but as the years progressed, so has he. He was making better reads, making better decisions. He's handling pressure at a higher rate. And I, do think that it's interesting just seeing how he's evolved and he's grown up and he is a better quarterback now than he was beforehand. He clearly is the superior player between him and Alonzo Barnett III. Alonzo Barnett III, don't get me wrong, is an all-right quarterback for sure. 21 touchdowns, 8 picks, is a 142.6 passer rating. But Moore is, top 10 in passer rating. He's 18th in QBR, 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and he's getting round 1 pick 1 hype from those who don't necessarily believe Mendoza's round 1 pick 1. So I like Oregon's quarterback situation here, and this just emphasizes that James Madison is going to have to ugly up this game if they want any shot here. That's why I think trench warfare, rushing offense, power rushing, fourth down conversion is the key to whether or not James Madison keeps this close or Oregon runs away with it. Even if James Madison does well in all those areas, if Oregon's talent gap is too big to overcome, then none of this will matter. And even if they do play well, Oregon could just roster them and the game is over by halftime. So those are some things I'm paying attention to. Just keep in mind, James Madison taking out sacks averaging 5.8 yards per carry. Oregon's averaging 6.3 yards per carry. Both are top 30 in rushing success rate. So we will see stellar rushing offenses and defenses here in this matchup in Autzen Stadium between the Sun Belt champion and the third place Big Ten team that was the Big Ten champion last season. I like Oregon here to win. I'm going to come out and say that because I don't think James Madison has any specific deadly advantage here. I do like Oregon to win, but I am not confident they're going to cover for a few reasons here. So number one, I think that James Madison's defense is fundamentally sound enough to where Oregon will not be able to run all over them. They'll be able to run on them in some drives, but not every drive. And they'll be able to get good enough pressure to where I think Oregon will punt some. I also believe that James Madison is a good enough rushing offense to probably put 1 or 2 long drives together that shortens the game, limits possessions, and makes Oregon a bit uncomfortable. Another important factor, though, is that I think Oregon knows they should win this and then play Texas Tech. And Texas Tech is an entirely different beast where Indiana is the team that if anyone's going to bust the blue chip ratio, it's probably them. But Texas Tech could also do that with how explosive their defense is. So I do think that even if Oregon gets up big, they'll probably load manage. And that gives an opportunity for James Madison to make this closer than it actually is. If it is a competitive game, then, well, 21.5 is too big for any game that's competitive unless Oregon, pulls away really, really late. So I just think the odds say that James Madison is more likely to cover than most analytics would say once you take in the human element, the fact that power ratings aren't predicting teams to load manage in game. That's where I feel that I'm confident Oregon will win, but I'm also fairly confident that James Madison will cover, and Oregon probably wins by anywhere from 14 points to 17 points. Like 10 to 17, 7 to 17 points is how much I think the Ducks win. They'll advance to play Texas Tech in the Orange Bowl. Very excited for that game. I think that could be the best college football playoff game that we've seen in a minute. Certainly has a lot of uniqueness to it. Certainly does. I made a mistake in that I did not record this live show. So, unfortunately for all of you, you're going to have to wait for the first round previews until tomorrow morning, unless I decide to re-record them, which I think would be a massive waste of time. But all these other segments from here on out, you will get to see after this show. Probably starting with these early previews for Michigan and Texas and for Nebraska, Utah. That's what we're going to talk about now. We've been live for exactly 1 hour. So thank you all for staying around. It's been an absolute pleasure, to say the least. It's been an absolute pleasure. Very refreshing water. Very refreshing. Okay. So, yeah. We can get on to these early previews now and then talk about the rest of these topics. Is there anything you guys want to talk about before we move on? You guys are pretty incredible. That's all I'm gonna say. really. Oh, my neck is sore. Don't don't totally know why, but my neck is sore. Anyway, it's gonna be an exciting first round, I think. Ideally, I wouldn't want Tulane or James Madison in the playoffs. I just don't think that. How do I put it? I don't really think that they deserve to. I don't think they deserve to be in a 12-team field because they don't play a tough strength of schedule. That's kind of my opinion on the whole thing. But it is what it is, and I do think that Tulane and James Madison are well enough coached and have good enough non-negotiables to potentially make their first round games interesting. But let's now go on to talk about a few things here. Most importantly, Michigan and Texas, giving an early preview on that. And that is, yeah, it's okay. It's the Citrus Bowl. The Citrus Bowl. The 2025 Citrus Bowl features the Michigan Wolverines and the Texas Longhorns. The Wolverines ranked 18th with a 9-3 record. The Texas Longhorns ranked 13th with a 9-3 record. Texas is favored by 5.5, 6, 7. I think it's, since this graphic has been made, it's trended more so towards 7. A lot of sharps buying in on Texas, with Michigan potentially having some opt-outs or expected players leaving for the portal, and more importantly, the firing of Sharon Moore, which was somewhat unexpected, not totally unexpected, but a shock to be sure to the senses. And Texas is also the better team in power ratings anyway. This will be a 3 p.m. Eastern Time game on New Year's Eve, broadcast to ABC. And am I excited for this game? Because I think it tells a lot about where these two teams are. And it tells where these two teams are because both of them had higher hopes than playing in the Citrus Bowl, especially Texas. But they have a lot coming back next year, at least in theory. Texas, because of the staff continuity, I'm pretty confident they'll have a lot coming back. I'm pretty certain with Michigan's NIL situation and the fact they'll probably upgrade at coach, and I think the players know that, they'll likely have a lot coming back too, but little bit unsure there. We'll have to wait and see more. This is going to be a big game for Biff Poggi and for Michigan's staff as well, as many of them will not be here next year, most likely. It's also a big game for Arch Manning and for some younger Texas players and younger Michigan players who haven't gotten to see the field all that much. So some early thoughts that I want to start off with. Who wants it? Who wants this game more? Because both of these teams expect to be in the college football playoff. Remember, if Sharon Moore were in the playoffs, beat Ohio State, and wasn't a complete moron with game management, I think that that scandal has different implications. They either would have fired him after the playoffs, maybe if it got bad enough, they would have fired him anyway, but I think they would have tried to cover it up rather than try to expose it to get him kicked out. Like, that's how college football works. It's a sad detail of a sport, but it is a reality. And for Texas, you were preseason number 1, and you're playing in the Citrus Bowl. You're fighting for 10 wins. You're not fighting for your 14th, 15th, or 16th win, as many were expecting you to. No, you are fighting for win 10 in the Citrus Bowl. It's not where the staff or players probably envisioned their path to lead to, but here they are. So, both teams will have opt-outs. There is a want-it factor here that definitely matters. Which offensive line plays better? That's something that is certainly going to determine this game. Texas has a decided edge on the defensive front, probably even with opt-outs. Michigan has a good enough defensive front to where, with how Texas's offensive line is played, they can get pressure and they can stop the run. Really, Michigan's O-line is better, and Texas's D-line is better. Those are the two best units on the lines of scrimmage. Michigan is only allowing 9.7% of their offensive plays to be havoc plays. Texas is allowing 14.6% of their plays to be havoc plays. Michigan is one of the best offenses at preventing havoc plays. Texas is one of the worst. This is also paired with Texas being one of the better teams of recent memory to get explosive plays and to score, especially in the passing game, whereas Michigan is pretty porous at those, though they can put an explosive rushing game together. So you get more variance with Texas's offense, less variance with Michigan's offense, and their offensive lines and scheme and just build overall has something to do with that. Quarterback upside is another topic of conversation here. So does Arch Manning or Bryce Underwood take control? Does one of them have a ace game where they just come out and they dominate from start to finish? I don't know. But both of these secondaries can be taken advantage of. Texas's has been exposed as the year's gone on. Michigan, from the jump, it felt like they were never really that good. And that's where I get to passing defense. Michigan on paper is better than Texas there, but that's because Texas has played a top 10 caliber schedule and Michigan's played a top 50 caliber schedule. And you also got to remember that Texas has played offenses that, like to go up tempo, like to be explosive, like to attack downfield. Michigan's really only played like 2, maybe 1 of those in Ohio State and USC. And their game plans involved a lot of quick game. And Ohio State, strangely enough, didn't want to run up the score all that much. They took the foot off the gas after really the first 2.5 quarters there. So Michigan's pass defense, I would say, here is inflated. Texas, probably won't be all that great either. I expect a lot of opt-outs for the Longhorns as they have a lot of players going to the NFL. I'd expect some opt-outs possibly for Michigan, but passing defense will be critical here. Last but not least, both receiver groups have struggled with separation. They have struggled with drops, with chemistry with their quarterbacks. So which receiver room steps up and makes some improvements with these extra practices? That's going to be a big part in whether or not the Wolverines or the Longhorns win this game. My early read, I will tell you right now, my early read is Texas. But this is an early preview here, and these bowl games are very, very weird, and we're just starting to get wind of opt-outs for many of these games, and, or opt-outs for the portal. Michigan doesn't even have a coach right now, and you bet they'll probably hire a coach before this game is played, and that announcement can certainly play into how Michigan's roster looks. So that's my early preview of the Citrus Bowl. Should be a fantastic game between two blue blood teams and two teams that I think will be better from a power ratings and coaching angle next year than they were this year. We got a super chat, guys. So, I gotta bring that up. Nebraska's going to get their butt kicked by Utah, but I'm stoked for the changes Rule has made in this offseason. Complete overhaul of the D with a new O-line coach. Go Big Red. Go Big Red. Yeah, so we're going to talk about Nebraska versus Utah next. That's what we're going to do. Oh, I did not mean to do that. I'm still getting adjusted to the new setup with the desktop. It is kind of a weird setup for sure. But my early read is Utah, not going to lie, but we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. I am excited for the preseason too, because I think Rule has made major upgrades at O-line coach. I think he's made upgrades at DC. We'll see if he makes an upgrade on the D-line coach. I think Nebraska is aware that they need to be more physical and they need to be a better team if they're going to succeed in the Big Ten. And I think you're seeing that with the additions that he's made and the changes. And I also can't wait to see what Nebraska does in the portal. So thank you, Going for Gold, for that $5 super chat. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Okay. Let's move on and talk about Nebraska versus Utah. Kyle Whittingham is retiring from his head coach position at the University of Utah after this year. Kyle Whittingham is an absolute legend. He's been at Utah for since 2005. That's pretty crazy. Kyle Whittingham has been the head coach at Utah since 2005, and this will be his final game as the head coach of the Utah Utes. He will be playing a blue blood in Nebraska, where Matt Rule is in year 3, and a year 3 that many found to be disappointing. But with a talented roster, with a whole month to prepare, and with, I think, kind of a re-injection of energy with Nebraska, where their new offensive line coach, Jeep Wade, is working with the offensive line to prepare for the bowl game. I think that there is going to be a lot of energy for this game from both sides, where the Cornhuskers and the Utes, they're going to bring it in the Las Vegas Bowl. And even though Utah's favored by 15.5 points, and many people look at this game and think that Utah is going to win handily and pull away, this New Year's Eve game at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, it'll be a 1:30 or 12:30 p.m. local kick. I forget if it's in Mountain Time or Pacific Time and how that changes with daylight savings time. But anyway, it's sometime there, local time, around 12:30 or 1:30. The Cornhuskers and the Utes are going to be in a Big 12, Big 10 battle, what was formerly a Pac-12 and Big 10 battle in the Las Vegas Bowl. Some things I'm paying attention to early. You do have the want it factor. Now, in this instance, I don't think either team is going to be disinterested. I think that both teams are really, 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 really going to want this, for sure. But Nebraska is decimated. Nebraska has been humiliated this year in a lot of ways. They had a tragic injury with Dylan Raiola. And I do think that, you know, they're going to want to avenge that. And Raiola, it's actually just broke like right now while I'm talking about this live in the segment, that Raiola intends to enter the transfer portal. So this is really the beginning of a new era in Nebraska. Like this game, this is an important game. Nebraska is going to be not just facing a ton of staff changes, and they've already made most of those, but they're going to be making a lot of roster changes too, plenty of identity changes. And Rule has done this before, and his teams don't quit. They show up, they provide energy. The times they've rarely not were against, for example, Minnesota this year or UCLA last year. Whenever they made big changes, think of Dana Holgerson coming in as the OC last year. Think of Heinrich Harburg in 23 when Jeff Sims was replaced. You get that jolt of energy. So I expect Nebraska to show up here. And obviously Utah showing out for their coach in Kyle Whittingham. The Nebraska D-line versus the Utah offensive line. I don't know if I can think of potentially a bigger mismatch in college football here, where Utah's offensive line has Caleb Lomu and Spencer Fano, future NFL tackles, and Nebraska's defensive linemen look like overweight linebackers. That's why Matt Rule is making the changes he is. So that is a thought of mine here where, you know, there's a reason why Utah's favored by this much, and it's because of their offensive line versus Nebraska's defensive line, and also because of their defensive line in front against a Nebraska offensive line that fired its O-line coach, Donovan Raiola, because it was awful. They struggled to run the football, and it was bad. And that was a big part of the reason why Raiola kept getting hit, probably why he got injured, and that might be part of the reason why he's entering the portal, is because of, you know, how the offensive line performed. And Utah's defensive line, it hasn't been perfect, but Morgan Scaley's a great defensive coordinator. He's fielded a top 25 defense this year. They've had some inconsistencies against the run, but Kansas State and Kansas can run the ball, and they have better offensive lines than what Nebraska has. So in the trenches, Utah reigns supreme here. One area with preparation that Nebraska could reign supreme is the passing offense. Now, I do trust Devin Dampier more than I do TJ Lateef, for sure. I think he's just... Devin Dampier's amazing. I would love to sit down with him and interview him about his time at New Mexico and his time at Utah and running those offenses with Jason Beck. Like, he has been phenomenal. He is the type of quarterback that if you're Utah, if you're a Big 12 team, you want. I mean, heck, a Big 10 team with an elite offensive line and run game and defense could use him. He's really good. Lateef is a project. But with time and with Nebraska having the superior receivers, maybe they could come up with something or cook up something in a game like this. As for the talent factor, this is probably the only area where, in actuality, Nebraska could face off against Utah, just from an overall roster talent angle. Both have like top 25 recruiting rosters. I think Utah's done a better job at developing for sure, and I think they are superior in the trenches by quite a bit. I also believe that Whittingham is a legend as a coach and someone who could have won a national title if he had more resources or coached a blue blood. And Matt Rule is just kind of a guy who's good at rebuilds, but nothing legendary. No disrespect to him. Good coach. Much better than I could ever be, than 99% of people could be. But Kyle Whittingham is a coach that is top 5 for me. Like, he's been top 5 for most of my channel's existence in my mind when I've graded him. Like, he is just the king of doing more with less. He is what people thought Paul Christ's Wisconsin was. That is how good Kyle Whittingham is. So, early read here is Utah, and probably by a comfortable margin, but again, we just don't know yet, and we are more than 2 weeks out from this game. So I wanted to give an early look at it, let you guys know what happened, and yeah, unfortunately for Nebraska, it looks like Dylan Raiola is going to be entering the portal. We'll see what happens to Nebraska moving forward. We'll see. Again, getting used to that setup there. It's a pretty annoying transition. That is breaking news. So what I'll probably do is, like, right after this live show, I will... Yup. Oh, ESPN confirmed it. Yeah, it's done. It's done. He's out. He's gone. Okay, I'm going to check real quick, really quickly, if Corn Crazed is going to go live for this. He probably will if he can. I don't know, like, if he will. But Corn Crazed is awesome, guys. I mean, he's absolutely phenomenal. So, yeah. Raiola in the transfer portal. It's the last thing Nebraska needed, guys, because Raiola was a really damn good quarterback. Was he perfect? No, but he's so much better than Lateef, and I just do not know who... Like, I mean, maybe they get DJ Lagway, and at that point, maybe they could even upgrade. Like, I think DJ Lagway with a Jeep Wade O-line and with Holgerson's development would probably be better than Raiola. But I don't know if they're going to get him. Like, Nebraska is not one of these top spending schools. They're not. So it's a very interesting topic of discussion for sure. That's crazy. Oh, Brennan Sorsby entered the portal, and he's rated higher than Raiola, which I actually think, to be fair, that makes sense. Like, Sorsby isn't coming off of an injury. He is more veteran-laden, and he does have mobility to him. I do wonder where Sorsby's going to go, where Lagway will go, and where Raiola will go. Same with Kenny Minchie and same with Aiden Giles. That's going to be interesting for sure. For sure. Oh wow, gosh, like half of Auburn's wide receiver core entered the portal. Trechke Kahuna entered the portal. Yeah, Wisconsin's losing like all of their good players. Wow. Yup, we're seeing a portal exodus today. That's for sure. Wow. Just really interesting stuff. Really interesting stuff. Anyway, this is not a transfer portal show. At least it's not the purpose of this live show. But yeah, it's interesting stuff for sure that we will be keeping our eyes on. Okay, really, really quickly here. Want to do a quick video talking about why I think Jim Knowles is an elite hire for Tennessee. Veteran defensive coordinator Jim Knowles has been hired by Tennessee as their new defensive coordinator. This is not breaking news, but I wanted to give this attention and give my thoughts on why I think this is an elite hire for Tennessee. So, starting off, Jim Knowles has a proven process. He went to Ohio State for 3 seasons, helped them win a national title, gave them their best defense under Day outside of the 2019 unit. Patricia has taken that to another level, but his system is proven, his process is proven. He helped build the current defense, not from a recruiting sense, but from, coaching up the players, running his defense, which is a defense that is one of the nation's best. Went to Penn State, faltered. I get that. I will take a lot of heat for still defending that. I think more of that was on Franklin and the caliber of player Penn State had more than anything else. Just look at his time at Duke or Oklahoma State, where the first year or a few years, as would be customary at those type of schools, is rough, but towards the end, things were pretty good, and at Oklahoma State, he fielded a top 10, top 5 defense, which is insane because you usually don't do that at Oklahoma State or Mike Gundy. The process is proven. His slow build, while slow, works almost everywhere. By an elite hire, I'm not saying he will field the best defenses at Tennessee consistently. I don't know about that. Tennessee does not have the recruiting prowess that Ohio State does, at least traditionally. This current Tennessee class is pretty close to the current Ohio State class, but that's just one class. We need to see more of that. When looking at the new era of college football, what helped Jim Knowles a lot in some instances was probably being able to, build roster over roster over roster, and the portal usually causes a lot of disruption. So I'm not saying that he is going to, hit the ground running at Tennessee. I would expect, with how bad the defense was this year, that there'll probably be an improvement in year 1. In year 2 or 3 is when really things will start clicking, if they do. But he is a much better, more qualified defensive coordinator than Tim Banks. Far better. Like he helped Ohio State, didn't exactly work out at Penn State, but outside of that Penn State stop, Ohio State, Oklahoma State, Duke, there was a clear build year over year over year, and then when it peaked, those were wonderful, if not historic, defenses for those programs. So the proven process is one reason I support this. The soundness is another reason I support this. His defenses keep everything in front of them. At Ohio State in year 1, no. Year 1 at a lot of places, no. But look at year 2 and 3 at Ohio State. Look at his final year with Oklahoma State. And even this year at Penn State, look at some of their later performances as the season went on. They did a better job at tackling, at being fundamentally sound, at keeping things in front of them. And I think that for Tennessee, where you already have the offense with Heupel and Hazel, and you have quarterback play, you have wide receiver play, last year and a little bit of 2023 was a bit of an aberration for the system with Joe Milton and Nico Iamaleava not panning out. I think that what you need is a fundamentally sound defense, where with Tim Banks and, under his defenses, they've produced pass rushers, but they've been kind of a boomer bust defense in a lot of different ways. And I think that Knowles, paired with these new, better recruiting classes, can really help level things up at Tennessee and take them from a playoff contender to a national title contender. Pressure, In 2021 and 2024, his defense has earned 50 or more sacks. That's crazy. Ohio State hasn't had a defense that got pressure like that in ages. And I know this Buckeye defense is, by all accounts, similar or better than last year when looking at the advanced analytics. But want to see how they play in the playoffs. And one thing last year's Buckeye defense was better at than this year's was getting to the quarterback. That's one thing last year was better at was getting more sacks and forcing more behind the chains situations for opposing defenses. And in 2021 at Oklahoma State, you also had that with Jim Knowles, where they, had over 50 sacks, and that was just in 14 games, not the 16 games Ohio State played in last year. So you'll still be able to get pressure on the quarterback. Again, it might take some time to get all these things introduced. I would expect that, especially given he's not taking over in a good situation. But you got to get to the quarterback to win. And you got to be fundamentally sound. And you have to have a proven process. Like we're checking a lot of boxes here. I also think his defense fits the SEC meta better than the Big Ten meta. So the weakness of a 4-2-5 is a power run game. That's the weakness. Running in between the tackles. Because naturally, since a 4-2-5 is a nickel defense, you have one less defender in the box. Unless you got Caleb Downs, which really helped Jim Knowles in that final year with Ohio State. And Caleb Downs and Jim Knowles, they're that's the ultimate power duo with Knowles' system. Because his system fits Downs like a hand in a glove. The SEC teams outside of maybe Georgia don't have a lot of power runs. They don't. They're more finesse oriented, a lot more pass oriented. And I think that is an area where Knowles can really excel with getting to the quarterback, keeping things in front of him. And when he finally gets players that can understand and fit his system, the explosive play rate just completely collapses. And now you have to nickel and dime them to death. And that's where a power run game and a very methodical offense can beat them. The SEC doesn't have a lot of those offenses, again, outside of Georgia or maybe Alabama if they can run the ball. But they can't run the football right now. And finally, already discussed this, Tennessee recruiting, already great without Knowles. Knowles isn't a recruiter, he's a schemer. They've already been recruiting well even before this hire. This was their best recruiting class in the Heupel era. So pairing him with better players than what Tennessee has had on defense previously will help maximize the gains of making this hire. Love this hire for Tennessee. I think it was a great steal for Josh Heupel and the Volunteers. I'm excited to see what this hire does for Tennessee, not just in the short term, but likely in the long term as well. Now looking at the Big Ten, I want to grade the regular season results of every Big Ten team. That's what I want to do now. So how did every Big Ten team perform this season? Here are my Big Ten regular season grades for the 2025 season. I want to start off by looking at the bottom half of the Big Ten. On the left-hand side of your screen, peering over, we got Purdue, Maryland, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Penn State, UCLA, Northwestern, and Nebraska. Most of these grades, as would be expected, are pretty poor, but some of them are okay, and I even think Northwestern kind of had a successful season, if we're being honest. Purdue, I gave him a C because Ryan Walters left that in a horrible place, left Purdue in a horrible situation. They just didn't quit. They actually competed in plenty of games. They technically doubled their win total, and they did it with a very tough schedule. That's admirable. When you have to play Indiana and Ohio State and Notre Dame in the same schedule, that's tough. That is tough. So, I think that while not a success, I don't think Barry Odom's first year with Purdue was a failure either. Maryland, Michigan State, and Penn State. Maryland and Michigan State went 4-8. Each had one win in Big Ten Conference play. Penn State went 6-6 with a 3-6 conference record. All of those teams received Fs. Penn State was supposed to compete for a title this year. Instead, they went 6-6 and fired their head coach. No more explaining needed. Michigan State and Maryland went under their preseason win total, or right about where it was. Michigan State fired their coach. Maryland admitted that they don't have the guts or balls to fire their coach as they should. And Maryland's schedule was pretty easy, and Michigan State had some games they could have won, but they all choked away. Those are failed seasons. Don't think there's much more of an explanation required. Wisconsin, the only reason their season isn't an F is they played the hardest schedule in college football, and they still came out with 4 wins. Close to an F because you were hoping for 5 wins, or maybe 6, and they could have earned a 5th against Minnesota. And they were, in hindsight, probably should have played Maryland competitively, and they were able to play Michigan competitively. They should have probably earned an additional win, at least out of that schedule. And they admitted they don't have the guts to fire Fickell. They have key players leaving. Their recruiting is destroyed. I have no idea where they're going from here. So I didn't quite give them an F, but it was still very much a failed season. Rutgers is a D+, very close to a passing grade, but with how bad Penn State turned out to be, the schedule ended up being easier than many thought in the preseason. They still went 5-7, 2-7, had some pretty humiliating losses mixed in there, struggled for much of the year, and I think that in year 20, 21, 2, 3, 4, 5, in year 6 of Greg Schiano, I think that more should be expected of Rutgers than going 5-7. This was a failure of a season for Rutgers. Not an overwhelming failure. They were very close to going bowling with a tough schedule. But I think with how Ethan Kaliak-Manis and that offense played, you would have expected more, and the defense just ruined everything. UCLA is a D. Similar reason to Rutgers and Wisconsin. Tough schedule, not the highest of expectations. It's only a D grade because they got 3 Big Ten wins, and I think Tim Skipper did an admirable job pulling up the ship. And with UCLA, I don't really expect them to be anything better than a 6-6 Big Ten team, and I don't think they should expect anything to be better than that. But they still fired their coach, and they looked like trash until they did so. And then as the season went on and people figured them out, they looked like trash again. Nebraska, I gave a C- grade. You passed the class, but you barely passed it. Barely. Just by the sliver of margins you passed because you earned that extra regular season win that you didn't get last year. If Nebraska somehow went 6-6, which, given they had a winning record in close games, they could have easily went 6-6, then this would be a catastrophic failure. But they at least earned that 7th win, even despite the quarterback injury. So I give them a passing grade, but a very low passing grade. If they go 7-5 next year, even with a much tougher schedule, that is a catastrophic failure. I think that given where Nebraska is and how they've recruited under Rule, how they've spent in the portal, and how much of their roster was young this year, I think in year 4 you should expect big things. And I think bigger things would have been expected of Nebraska this year had the quarterback not been hurt and had the season, it was clear pretty early on that this was a team that needed to win close games, as the Big Ten bus tour said in the preseason. Northwestern, I gave an A-. Going bowling with that schedule at Northwestern is a success. It's not a tremendous success, but it's pretty close to it. So that's why I gave them an A- grade here. For the top half of the Big Ten, teams 1 through 9, Minnesota, Illinois, and Michigan were the only teams that didn't receive an A- grade or higher. For Minnesota, 7-5, and the way 7-5 panned out was, it was a bit gross. Left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Not terrible, not a failure, but PJ Fleck is well within his time at Minnesota. There isn't any rebuild. These are all of his players, all of his recruitment, all of his strategy, all of his development. It felt like he bungled the defensive coordinator hire. That's what it felt like to me, where the offense was about as good as it was last year, And the defense just took a big step back, and they still found a way to win 7 games, but it was a much more disappointing 7-5 than I think last year was. We'll see what they do in the bowl game, and we'll see what they do next year. But I do think there are some changes that they probably need to make if they want to win more games than just 7. 7 wins is never a failure at Minnesota, but that doesn't mean it has to be recognized as a tremendous success either. It's not a fireable offense, but it's not something you have to be jumping up and down for. Illinois finishing 8-4, gave it a B. I think an A would have been 9 wins, or an A minus B plus would have been 9 wins. An A plus would have been reaching 10 wins. They won 8, getting destroyed by Ohio State, by Indiana, losing to Wisconsin, getting dominated by Washington. Their key win of the year was against USC, which in hindsight was a true upset win. USC was clearly the better team. Illinois just took advantage of some things and outcoached USC and won that game with that walk-off field goal. So I would say it's a mild success for Bret Bielema to have back-to-back 8-win seasons, and if they win their bowl game, they'd have back-to-back 9+ win seasons for maybe the first time in Illinois school history. What Bret Bielema is doing at Illinois is incredible. They aren't a college football playoff contender like a lot of people tab them to be incorrectly, but they are a really good program, and I respect them for sure. Michigan, C+ for the regular season. Moore got fired after the season for reasons that were partially related to on-field stuff, because I think they may have covered it up if he was having much better success on the field, but a lot of that had to do with him being a scumbag for cheating on his wife. And I just hope those kids and I hope his wife are okay. Be praying for them. That is horrible for him to rip that family apart. On the field, though, for Michigan, Moore was a moron. He had good enough recruiting and it in parts good enough assistant coaching to put together a season that was not a catastrophic failure, but was not a success either. That's why I gave it a C+. If I had to lean one way or the other, I'd lean more towards failure than success for this Michigan team. But 9 wins and 7 wins in conference is never an abject failure when you're in year 2 as a head coach and you lost as much on your roster as you did from the prior regime. So I'm not going to say that Michigan totally failed, but they had more of a failed year than a successful year. And it was going to be a huge test for Moore next year to see if he was the guy. Obviously he was not. He was even worse than Mel Tucker was, which speaks to Michigan's potential and the infrastructure they have, where they are really a blessed and privileged university for having their own version of Mel Tucker win 9 regular season games. That's incredible. So I think they're going to upgrade from here into 2026. We'll see. This year was pretty underwhelming, though. And then for Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana, I gave them all A+. Probably should have put an A++ with a different color for Indiana. Probably should have done that because they had a historic year. But they earned, say a 105 or 110% with extra credit, which is still graded as an A+, same as a, say, 97+% that Ohio State and Oregon earned. If I were to have to change one of these grades, it would be Ohio State down to an A. I'm not doing that because they emphatically beat Michigan, but Ohio State has the easiest schedule, I would say, out of the bunch. And, they have the same amount of losses as Oregon, and their expectations are the highest in the Big Ten. So if I had to change one grade, it would be that. But I think Ohio State has had an A+ regular season, going 12-0, destroying Michigan, looking like at worst the second or third best team, and at best the best team in America, and a team that possibly matches last year. That's a successful year for Ohio State and really the best that you could ask for. Indiana, this is more than Indiana fans could ever dream of. And for Oregon, I would say 11-1 with how much they lost, and with the fact that Indiana turned out to be really freaking good, and the fact that Iowa turned out to be better, and USC was a 9-win team. That was close to as good as they could have asked for. So those 3 programs, those are your top 3 Big Ten teams and programs and coaching staffs right now by quite a comfortable margin. No coincidence that they are your top three teams in the Big Ten, your only teams in the Big Ten to reach the college football playoff, and your only teams to have A plus excellent grade by not just myself, although I count, and I think my grades are pretty spot on, but I think everyone else would also say those are the only teams that had absolutely stellar seasons. Okay, time to talk a little bit more about Kurt Sig. Okay, what happened with my live show? Just making sure nothing happened. Okay, my live show's still going. That's pretty... Wait. Oh, shucks. I skipped Iowa and Washington and USC. I did skip them. That's my bad. But I can always make a comment explaining that. And I think people understand why I would give those grades too. You know, all went over their preseason win totals, all finished in the top 25 in terms of power ratings. Relative to expectations, all of them had pretty successful seasons. Okay. Now we can talk about Indiana and Curt Cignetti. Curt Cignetti has achieved the greatest two-year coaching run in college football history. And let me show you why. He is 24-2 as Indiana's head coach, with 2 college football playoff appearances and 1 Big Ten title at Indiana. At Indiana. Let that sink in. Ponder on that. Sit on that thought for a minute. He, over the past 2 seasons, this one included, is tied first for winning percentage with Oregon. He has a 17-1 Big Ten record. He has 2 playoff appearances. 2. 2 seasons back-to-back with at least 11 wins. 11 wins last year, 13 wins this year. Lost to Notre Dame in the playoffs last year in pretty dominant fashion. The score wasn't as close as 27-17 said it was. But this year, they controlled and dominated Oregon. They kicked Ohio State's rear in the trenches. They beat that Buckeye team in Indy. And they are number 1 in most power ratings right now. That's pretty incredible, if I do say so myself. What a phenomenal turnaround, and what a wonderful coaching job. You know, you're first in FPI this year and first in efficiency. Last year you were 10th in FPI and 7th in efficiency. You've had several program-defining and career-defining wins, where Nebraska last year, you destroyed. You destroyed them 56-7. You finally beat Michigan for the first time in a non-COVID season in eons. Finally beat them 20-15. Those are your biggest wins. People mocked Indiana for not winning the big games. But I, and you, if you're an Indiana fan especially, and objective, and other objective people saw through that, said that wasn't fair. This year, they leveled up, and they didn't just win big games. They dominated and controlled their opponent in some of those big games. So Illinois, they beat 63-10, just casually. And this year's Illinois team is probably better than last year's Nebraska team, or at least very comparable. And they won in a more dominant way. They beat Iowa at their own game. Wasn't a domination, but they survived and beat them. They controlled Oregon. That final score should have been 30-13. I mean, that pick six just is what it is. And it happens, it counts, but Oregon basically outside of a field goal shut out, or Indiana outside of allowing that field goal shut out Oregon's offense in that second half. You also have to consider that they had several false starts that should have been called offsides, for example, or just several false starts in general that prevented them from extending drives. That game could have been so much worse. And at the end, watching that game, I can vividly remember where I am watching the Hoosiers do to the Ducks what a few weeks earlier I saw the Red Raiders do to the Utes, where the Utes were expected to win. I thought they would win because of superior talent, and I was wrong. And I instead watched a more talented team just kind of slowly choke out the home team until they, you know, blood came out of their mouth and they just died. And that was it. That was Utah, Texas Tech. Oregon, Indiana was similar, where Indiana's just slowly choking Oregon out. And I picked Indiana to cover in that game. Sadly picked them to lose, but at least to cover. Fortunately got on the right side of history when I picked them to beat Ohio State. And while they didn't control Ohio State in the same way they did Oregon, I thought they played a cleaner game against Oregon than they did Ohio State. And they didn't have Omar Cooper Jr. against Ohio State. And while Ohio State made mistakes of their own, both teams did not play their best game. Ohio State made some dumb play calls. Indiana had some misses where they had open receivers or they had a great one-on-one ball that they usually come down with, and they didn't. That first shot to Omar Cooper Jr. is a perfect example. They also had several holes that they created on their offensive line that against normal opponents they would have had big gains against, or against Ohio State they would have had usually more than one big gain against. But Ohio State's defense probably played their best game of the season or something close to that, factoring what offense they were facing up against, and they tackled perfectly every time, even with one hand. And yet they still won. Missed a field goal through a really dumb interception. They didn't take advantage of some one-on-one opportunities the way they usually do. They didn't break the tackles that they usually do or take advantage of some open holes created by their O-line that they usually do. Same as Ohio State, made mistakes, and Indiana came out on top, and they had the better game plan. They had the gutsier quarterback. Their quarterback made better decisions, and they stood up, and they fought, and they threw the punch when it mattered most, and the punch landed. That's good coaching. That's elite coaching. This is an elite team. There is a reason this team is second in odds to win the national title, guys, and why they're number one in a lot of power ratings. You know, it's them or Ohio State who's number one in power ratings. And if you add a human element to it, you could say, well, maybe Georgia or maybe Oregon. There's no team that is clearly on top right now, but I would have to lean Indiana if I were to choose a team on top. They consensus are number one in power ratings right now. They're the only undefeated team. And, you know, they beat the previous number one team in power ratings and rankings head on. They beat them. They outcoached them. They made the better decisions, and they matched Ohio State athletically, and they beat them. I mean, beat them physically. They surpassed Oregon athletically and beat Oregon physically. That's crazy for Indiana to be doing those things. So that is why I think Curt Cignetti's masterpiece is the most impressive masterpiece, especially in a 2-year window that we have seen in college football. And if they somehow win the title this year at 16-0, or they continue to put together these wins in big games and small games and keep this winning percentage up and sustain it, that would add to the already legendary status that Curt Cignetti has earned as the head coach of the Indiana Hoosiers. It has been nothing short of phenomenal and historic. And I don't know how you couldn't view Curt Cignetti as a top 3, top 2 head coach after what he has done this year. It's absolutely, it is bonkers. It is nuts. It's crazy. Got some more super chats. So I'm going to need to pull out I'm going to need to get to the pop out chat. Love the super chats coming in, guys, by the way. Thank you for these super chats. I love them. Love them, love them, love them, love them. Love them, love them, love them. Let's get to them, though. Pop it in. And then up next, we'll briefly talk about the biggest strengths and weaknesses of every playoff team. Pissed off Ohioan, or pissed Ohioan. Sam, with people like RJ Young talking about this, how would you feel if Michigan pulls the trigger and brings Dabo Swinney to Ann Arbor? RJ Young saying that means that he is not a credible person to follow, or he is rage baiting. I would no longer be a Michigan fan if Michigan hired Dabo Swinney. I would become an open Michigan State and Ohio State and Indiana fan. Only reason I don't mention Indiana as often when talking about this is because Indiana's not a rival with Michigan. Like, I would openly become a fan of a rival to make Michigan mad and to spite them if they hired Dabo Swinney. And then, when he is inevitably fired in disgrace, I would then become a Michigan fan again. And it would take a long time for me to forgive my university for making one of the dumbest calculations possible. Like, if you hired Dabo Swinney as Michigan, it wouldn't be as sinful of a mistake as what Moore made, but it would be just as dumb and low IQ as what he did. Hiring Swinney right now, if you were a program that wants to win, hiring Dabo Swinney is the equivalent from a dumb. It's an equivalent on the dumb smart scale as following a OnlyFans model with your main Instagram account. It's the same thing. Obviously not the same thing from a like right versus wrong angle, especially if you're married, but you get the point. It would be so dumb. And I'm just going to leave it at that because I could go on a rant about that forever. Thank you, Pissed Off Ohioan, for the $5 super chat. Appreciate it a lot. Patrick Emmett. Thanks for your great work all year, Sam, and go Hoosiers. From an alum class of 83 that never could have imagined what's going on with Indiana since Coach Cignetti showed up. Go Hoosiers. It has been incredible, hasn't it, Patrick? You're about my dad's age, I think. And my dad, he saw what D'Antonio did at MSU and what Saban did in his final year at MSU. And that to him is such a fantastic memory. To see D'Antonio win the Rose Bowl, to see him, put together teams that were truly top 10 that could punch above their weight class, seeing elite defenses, seeing wins over Ohio State, seeing a coach with a winning record over Michigan. And that's phenomenal. And for you, Indiana's had one of the worst football histories in America. And now they're number one in power ratings? They're a top 2 favorite to win the national title? They have taken 3 stars and G5 players and developed almost all of them into day 2, day 3 picks, and Mendoza's now round 1, pick 1? What? They beat Ohio State? They beat Oregon? They beat Iowa? They earned their first program win at Penn State ever? It's so incredible. And I'm happy for you, and I'm happy for Indiana. I'm so happy. So, yeah, go Hoosiers, go Hoosiers. And as of right now, look, I don't know if this will happen, but I'm rolling with Indiana to win the Natty right now. I don't think anyone will outcoach them. And that's a huge strength. Like, if they lose, it's because of what people assume their roster limitations are. You're not going to outcoach these guys. You're not going to out-scheme them. And look, I mean, losing daily is huge, but championship teams, look, they're okay. Well, we have someone else. We'll plug them in and we'll reload. And Indiana did not have that depth last year. I don't think they have that depth overall this year, but I think on defense they have that depth. Bad A Buckeye, you are on early. Yes, I am. I'm did a much better job of trying to follow my schedule today than I ever have, and we're trying to go live at noon, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from here on out. Armand Hammer trying to roll with the new schedule. Go Hoosiers. Guess you will cheer for them. Michigan is done. I don't know who them is, but I mean, if Michigan hires Dabo Swinney, I won't root for Michigan until he's fired. Like, I would seriously, like, my career as a Michigan fan would be on pause. Um, I do not think Oregon. I do not think though that Indiana would be the Oregon of Oregon last year. Ohio State, I think, is it would take a lot for them to be even the same team they were last year. They're not. They're not better than they were last year. I think last year's Ohio State beats this Indiana team. I mean, really think about it. Last year they had first round D tackle, first round linebacker, first round safety. That's three aliens on defense. And Sawyer and Tuimoloau were good enough to where they were in that conversation before the year and just fell out of it. For example, you this year have, let me see, D tackle, two linebacker. You have four aliens defensively. So about the same, maybe a little bit more. Offensively, though, last year you had three first round receivers. This year you have two. Last year you have a first round offensive tackle who could have also played guard. That's insane. Like that's an alien. This year you don't have that on the O-line. Last year you had two day two running backs who were both balling out in the NFL. This year you got Bo Jackson, who's just a good college running back, and right now nothing better than that. He probably will be in the future, but we're talking about right now, not the future. Indiana is also probably better than last year's Oregon because they can actually stop the run. And last year's Oregon could not stop the run. Like, Indiana is probably not as talented from an NFL angle as Oregon last year, although maybe they are. I'd be curious to see how many of these guys get drafted when it's all said and done. I think a lot of them, I think it could be like 2023 Michigan in a Walmart way, where a lot of these guys are day 3, day 2 picks. They don't have Kenneth Grant. They don't have Mason Graham. Mendoza is a better prospect than J.J. McCarthy, though. They also don't have a Will Johnson or, well, Pons might be as good. I know he's shorter, doesn't have the measurables, but, I mean, damn, his college play has been awesome. This isn't the field last year, where if Ohio State moved into their extra gear, no one could beat them. We've seen Ohio State move into their extra gear this year in the regular season, and they still have issues. They don't have the same ceiling they did last year. They don't. And that's not to say they can't win it all, because they certainly can, and they should be one of the favorites too, if not the favorite. But it just, yeah, like they reloaded, but they reloaded in the sense that they're still contending for the same thing. They're not the same power-rated team they were last year, I don't think. It's the defense, sure, like that unit completely reloaded, but what about the offense? Like, rushing offense is worse, passing offense is worse, like pass blocking, I would say, is probably worse. Just my opinion, though. And last year's team also played a much tougher strength of schedule. And yet they have like last year's team at the end of the day has a higher points per play margin than this year's team, despite playing 6 times the amount of top 10 FPI teams. And yet they have a higher points per play margin. Like, it's not fair to make a final judgment until the season ends, but odds say last year's team will finish analytically better than this year's team, I think. So, Ohio State, could they win it all? Yeah, I think it'll come down to them, Georgia, Indiana, or Oregon. It'll be one of those 4 teams that wins it all. I pretty much think I have those teams as almost a lock to be the semifinals, with the exception of Texas Tech, Oregon. Texas Tech could add a little bit of humor, a little bit of intrigue, and totally beat Oregon with how they play defense. Anyway, let's move on, talk about each playoff team's biggest strength. I'm going to give you the biggest strength, or that's not how it is. I'm going to give you the biggest strengths of every college football playoff team and talk about why they can succeed in the college football playoff. So to start off, we have James Madison, the 12th seed. James Madison, I love their staff, love their backs, their offensive line, and their defense as a whole. It's one of the better defenses in the country analytically. It would be, I think, an above average good, maybe even great power 4 defense. How they succeed? They are so good analytically and so reliable there that I trust them if they can stay healthy and if they can scale their talent against teams that have a much higher blue chip ratio and are bigger, faster, and stronger with measurables. Tulane, the 11th seed. They can succeed by forcing teams to play on their terms. Love their staff with John Sumrall, like their quarterback and running back room, and the defensive front and special teams are very solid. If they can get teams to play a physical fist fight and to focus on ground and pound and not airing it out, they can succeed. And they can keep it close and compete in this playoff. At 10, we have Miami. Love their coordinators. Do love Cristobal as a preseason builder, not really as a game manager, though. Receiver, trenches, and overall defense are their strengths. How they succeed, and this is interesting because unlike the G5 teams, Miami can actually win it all. Wouldn't pick them to. I think there's a very slim chance they could bust the bracket. Run a balanced offense. If the run game comes alive, if Beck does not turn into a pumpkin and start handing the ball to the other team, that defense is good enough to where with a balanced offense and how they love to play game control, they could possibly choke out any team they play, win a bunch of close games, and win the Hurricanes' first national title since 2001. At 9, we got Alabama. How they succeed is making improvements on offense because I think the defense is as good as it's going to get. I think Kane Womack has done a good job there. But the offense has fallen apart. They cannot run the ball to save their life. Simpson is behind. I question his development. I love Kalen DeBoer. Don't love the assistant staff all that much. Receiver and then the entire defense are other areas of strength. They can gain strengths if Simpson improves, but that's asking a lot with how this team has looked since the month of November. At 8th, we have Oklahoma. Their staff has done a phenomenal job this year managing the team, punching above their weight class. I love Isaiah Satenya, really their only receiver I love, and Deion Burks, and then their entire defense and special teams unit. They're very much like Iowa if Iowa had some apex receivers, which would be very scary. And that's what Oklahoma is. They are scary to anyone, really, I think, in America on any given Saturday, outside of maybe some exclusive group of 2 or 3 or 4 teams. They need to pray that Mateer stays healthy because, as we've seen with Iowa, you can have an elite defense and special teams unit, but if you do not have an offense to pair with that, you will not beat these great teams. And they have to play Alabama. If they beat Alabama, they got to play Indiana. If they somehow beat Indiana, then you're looking at Texas Tech or Oregon. You need Mateer to stay healthy on top of being on your A game. That's going to be challenging, but that's how they will succeed. We have Texas A&M at 7th. They need to protect Marcel Reed because when Reed is protected, he can play at an NFL level. When he's not, he turns into a pumpkin. Mike Elko is one of the best coaches in America. I love their skill positions and their lines of scrimmage. Their weak spot is secondary in the inconsistencies of the quarterback. And how you minimize those and how you succeed is you play to your strengths while protecting Marcel Reed. And thankfully, their offensive line is a strength for the Aggies. At 6th, we have Ole Miss. Quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, really the overall offense I love for Ole Miss. The QB play has a high floor, and that is how Ole Miss succeeds here. Is Chambliss sets a floor for your team, and you trust him to run the offense, and you attack defensive weaknesses, and with Kawan Lacey running the ball and being a really good running back, and with those wide receivers and tight ends, you can score enough points on most teams in the field to win a game or two. Don't know if they can win much beyond that, but if Pete Golding won more than a single playoff game, if he somehow, say, beats Georgia, that would be automatically an extremely successful tenure for him. At 5th, we have Oregon. They will succeed because they find big plays and create them against anyone. And that's a non-negotiable. And their offensive line is huge and possibly one of the best in America. It has the highest ceiling for sure. Their staff, quarterback room, running backs, tight ends, lines of scrimmage, overall defense, and overall offense when healthy are awesome. From here on out, we're really entering a different tier of teams where how they succeed directly translates to they win the national championship. And for Texas Tech, I don't have them in my group of 4 teams that I think can win it all will make up the semifinals. But if I had to add a 5th team there, it would be Texas Tech. The explosive defense can create touchdowns, turnovers, give the offense another chance, even when it's inconsistent, to stack points and to really get in the head of opposing quarterbacks and break down opposing offensive schemes, structures, and rosters. Love their defensive coordinator, Sheil Wood. I think running back, wide receiver, tackle, and defense and special teams are what makes Texas Tech a fantastic unit. For Georgia, they will succeed and win it all, if that's what you think, because they are just tougher than you. And you cannot cut you can't cut their head off. And that's what you need to do to beat Georgia. They have one of the best staffs in America. Stockton, I think, is a strength. Receiver, tight end, and O-line and overall offense is fantastic. And the defensive front is great. I do have questions about their defensive backfield, but it has improved as the season's gone on, and they have a reliable special teams unit. That is a team that is very scary. Same with Ohio State. When you have 6 first-round picks, so think about it. Jeremiah Smith's going to be a first-rounder. Carnell Tate is a first-rounder. Caden McDonald, probably a first-rounder. At worst, day 2 player. Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, first-rounder. Caleb Downs, locked to be a first-rounder. That's the most first-rounders. And most first-rounders, if you take out Jeremiah Smith, 5 on a team for the upcoming NFL draft. Those teams, they don't always win titles, but they're always in that conversation. And with an elite staff, wonderful quarterback, an improving running back group, a tackle group where, they do function well when the interior isn't, sat on its butt, and elite receivers and a defense that is the nation's best right now, I would say, that is a team that I would not want to play. That's a team that is one of the strongest in college football. No coincidence they're the number 2 seed. The final member of this group of top 5 teams is Indiana. They will succeed because they won't be outcoached. And they also combine that with Georgia's whole mantra of they are just tougher than you. That is a deadly combo. They have, I think, the best staff in college football. They have the best quarterback in college football, at least in the playoffs. They have a powerful running back group, underrated receivers, with receiver depth that I think is one of the best in the sport. Their lines of scrimmage are some of the best in the sport. And their defense and special teams unit is crazy. I mean, this is the most complete team in college football, with the most complete staff in college football. That is Indiana's strength. Their strengths are, they number like the grains of sand on a beach. That's the case with a lot of these teams towards the top, but that's especially the case with Indiana. And having that coaching staff with their toughness and strengths, ultimate non-negotiable. And that's with Indiana, Ohio State, Oregon, maybe Texas Tech, definitely Georgia. Those 4 or 5, including Tech, are the teams that I think can win it all. I think they have the most strengths and the most potent strengths and X factors. For weaknesses, now this is going to be interesting for sure. Here is why every college football playoff team can fail and what their Achilles heel is. The weaknesses for these playoff teams will start off, as we did with the strengths, with the G5 teams, the lower seeds. With James Madison, the pass offense and blue chip ratio is really their potential Achilles heel here. They can't scale with elite teams is why they will fail. It is so hard to scale with the top teams, and when you've never been tested and given an opportunity to scale against the top teams, it's pretty fair to assume that you will have issues there. You're going from playing a Sun Belt schedule to, facing off against Oregon. And Oregon is way better than Louisville. Way, way, way better than Louisville. So Those things hurt James Madison. If they can somehow defy that, I love a lot of what their roster and analytics say about them. For Tulane, it's similar, but I think I can go deeper than that. I don't like using blue chip ratio unless I have to, because it does matter. But if I can explain a weakness away with other more specific things, I will. And for Tulane, it's their pass game, both the pass defense and pass offense. If they fail to play by their game, which is ground and pound and being, in the mud, they will not win a game and they will not succeed. Love their staff, love a lot of things about Tulane, do not love their air attacker defense. For the Miami Hurricanes, inconsistent QB play with Beck turning into Timmy from South Park or a scarecrow or a pumpkin or whatever snide comment you want to use. That and a run game that just has been powerful at times but inconsistent, and it has never been explosive. That's a bad combination where you have to rely on an inconsistent QB to win you games. Carson Beck flipping out is why they will fail. Where, say, against A&M, he's pressured, they can't really run, and he throws a pick six to like Will Lee Jr. or Will Lee the third. That could be game over, where just one mistake in that type of game and environment can cause everything to unravel. They need him to be consistent, to be calm, and they need other parts of the offense to function to help ease his burden. At 9, with Alabama, their weakness is they have absolutely no run game, and their offensive line is extremely inconsistent. It has a high ceiling in theory, but its floor is really low, and they have not been playing to their ceiling. The injuries piling up will be their ultimate Achilles heel, though, where, say they somehow beat Oklahoma, but they get more seriously injured, and then they play Indiana. I do not care that Alabama has one of the highest blue chip ratios in the sport, and they're playing an Indiana team that has showed it can scale talent. If they are banged up, they will get killed by anyone beyond Oklahoma. Even Oklahoma. If Alabama shows up the way they did against Georgia with those injuries and where Georgia quickly established a mental dominant game, they could lose decisively. So they need to figure out a lot of things offensively, in particular, to have success. For Oklahoma, it's really just simple. The offense is bad. So your defense can't score 3 times. Probably not. And if they do once, they're not doing so again. They need to hold on in every game. And that's why out of all the teams that are either receiving a bye or playing at home, I'm very adamant that Oklahoma can't win at all. It's just, even though they fulfill the blue chip ratio, the style of ball they play is less sustainable than Texas Tech and Indiana, who don't fulfill the blue chip ratio but have much better offenses objectively than the Sooners do, on top of probably having equivalent or better defenses. They need to just hold on, win the turnover battle, and while it's not sustainable, you keep saying, like, hey, we're Oklahoma, we're going to keep doing it our way, and maybe you luck into making a run. For A&M, much like Miami, with the inconsistent QB play, but unlike Miami, the defense is an issue. If they can't protect Marcel Reed, it's going to be a long day in Aggie land against Miami, and if they somehow survive that, they're not getting past Ohio State. That's why they fail, is the trouble they have had protecting Marcel Reed and how he quickly decomposes as a quarterback when he is under extreme pressure. Number 6 is Ole Miss. When you have that coaching staff exodus and your head coach is no longer with you, that's a big drop-off going from Lane Kiffin to Pete Golding. And the defense is bad. There's no sugarcoating that. It is a bad defense. They will fail because they can't stop the run. And that opens up opportunities in the passing attack. And while their offense is great, it is not elite. It was potent because of Kiffin and his schematics, and they still had issues outside of that. So, yeah, a lot of weaknesses for Ole Miss. Teams from here on out don't really have a lot of weaknesses. They have some for sure, at least on paper, but they're not as backbreaking as the previous teams we've talked about. Wide receiver depth and inconsistent offense, and those two go hand in hand. Some of these other weaknesses they don't cause each other at all. Oregon's inconsistent offense is directly caused by their wide receiver depth. They will fail because they can't stop. They can't stop defenses from causing inconsistencies and from causing enough 3-and-outs to where against elite defenses, as we saw against Indiana, and at times against Iowa, they can't really create. They struggle at that. They need Brycen Moore and Evan Stewart and those tight ends. They need them healthy. If they can get them healthy, then they might be a team that doesn't really have many, if any, weaknesses. For Texas Tech, it's the red zone offense and the offensive line. They've had issues pass blocking against the better defenses they've played. That's going to suck because BYU and great Big 12 defenses are nothing compared to Oregon or any of the defenses for the most part that they will play in the playoffs. Morton staying healthy is going to be critical, and if he gets hit a lot, the odds of that are just going to drop at almost an exponential rate the more he gets hit. And the red zone offense, even when he's been well protected or when things are going well, has not been the best either. For Georgia, their explosive run game is lacking, and their pass defense in the past has been a weakness. I'm still putting it up there because we've seen it in the past, and I don't know if the Alabama game was more about Georgia or more about the Crimson Tide. We'll see. Another area that could play into why they will fail is because of their lack of upside at quarterback, where sometimes you just need your quarterback to come through and win a game for you. Ole Miss can do that. Oregon can do that. Indiana and Ohio State can. Texas Tech has enough of an explosive defense to where they don't probably need that as much as Georgia. Possibly. Though, actually, you know what? I'm going to take that back because Georgia's offense is much better. But Texas Tech and Georgia are similar in that area. And that can come back to bite you sometimes. For Ohio State, the offensive line and red zone offense, I think there's a lot of similarities between the Buckeyes and Texas Tech, where Tech in a lot of ways is a more boomer bust version of Ohio State, where the ceiling isn't higher, like they have a lower ceiling and lower floor, obviously, but stylistically they're more explosive than Ohio State, but they have similar strengths and similar weaknesses, where the defense is just suffocating and the O-line and red zone offense just messes everything up when things go poorly. They will fail because their struggle to protect Sayin against great defenses, or their need to really limit the playbook and change the game because they can't protect Sayin against elite defense. Think of the Texas game. They probably, if they try to roll out a similar game plan they did against Indiana or Michigan, where they wanted to go downfield a lot, they probably allow more pressure to Texas than they did that day. But because they ran that specific game plan, they were able to go around it. The problem with that game plan is you're going to play a lot of teams competitively if you're going to slow that game down and be very conservative, as Ohio State was that day. And almost everyone you'll play in the playoffs will be better than that Texas team you played in week 1. For Indiana, their weakness is a lack of depth on offense, I would say, outside of receiver, and the blue chip ratio. Why they will fail is the injury to Stephen Daly is just the beginning, and they start getting hurt in every game from here on out until their depth is so thin and tested that one of Ohio State or Georgia is able to kick them down the stairs. And by that, I don't mean destroy them, but I am of a firm belief that no one's going to outcoach Indiana. You will either match them coaching-wise with their staff or lose the coaching battle. So from that point, I just mean roster by roster, the opponent will be good enough roster-wise to where they can compensate for the coaching edge by having a roster edge. That's Indiana's weakness. That's the weakness for all of the playoff teams, their biggest and most critical weaknesses, and why each of them can fail in the college football playoff. Moving on. Oh, we are so close to being done. Guys, we are so close to crossing that finish line. So close. It's crazy. We have a lot of topics to get to, but I think we can probably buzz through a lot of these pretty quickly, like 5 minutes. Oh, crazy. And yeah, guys, someone mentioned it earlier, but keep political stuff out of the chat. We all have our beliefs. I do too. Everyone watching this does. You know, the most far left and far right person does. The most centrist apolitical person has their beliefs. But this is college football. And something that has made college football particularly, you know, football in general particularly unenjoyable is when people try to get politics involved and they say, well, politics is, super, super important and we need to make sure that everyone's educated. And that goes for both sides. And yes, it is important. It is more important than college football. But that doesn't mean it has to be everywhere. One thing that makes, America unique and other countries around the world that are also well off is we have something called freedom, and we're our own people. I'm Samuel Recker of College Football with Sam, and this is my job. Someone named, Derek or Jim or CJ or DJ or Ahmed, they're their own people and they have their own jobs and they are unique and they get to decide what they want to listen to and what they don't want to listen to. When you have to involve politics in everything, you become like Germany in World War II and like the Soviet Union or present-day North Korea. You become an oppressive, totalitarian regime. So, not saying any of you are that, because you are not. I know we're just passionate about things, but this is probably a environment where people just want to break. They don't care about politics right now. They just want to listen about their favorite football team. And that's where I'm at when I do this. I just want to talk football and have fun with you all. I do not want to debate elections or anything. I mean, I couldn't even do that. I've been so out of the loop, not following news. I don't really care as much as I used to because it's just, it is what it is. It has its place. It's important. But just because something is important doesn't mean you have to talk about it 24/7, every minute, every second of the day. Things we can compartmentalize here. So be understanding of that. Let's finish out, though. We got all the big topics out of the way. So excited to get all these videos and clips out. Let's just buzz through these. Once again, I see Oregon being undervalued, and it's gotten under my skin before. It's getting under my skin again. Where you look, I'm going to look this up right now, little bit of live research here. You look at the percentage of people picking Oregon to win the college football playoff in ESPN's college football playoff bracket challenge, and 29.6, basically 30% of people are picking Ohio State, about 27% of people are picking Georgia, 24% are picking Indiana to win, and only 4% of people are picking Oregon to win. 6% of people are picking Texas Tech to win. How is it that Oregon is 20 percentage points below Indiana, they are 23 percentage points below Georgia, and they are 26 percentage points below Ohio State in being picked to win the bracket? That is insanity. They are not that much worse than those three teams. I agree that they are worse. I would have Oregon power rated fourth right now, behind Indiana, Georgia, Ohio State, and then Oregon would slide in there at fifth. But they are not, they're not like a touchdown worse than all of those teams. They are within a touchdown of all of those teams from a power ratings angle. I do not get this thing where Oregon is viewed as this team that is good but not great. They're not just great. Relative to this season, not all time, but relative to this year, they're in that near elite to elite conversation. I mean, look at these analytics here. Just read them. They're top 15 in yards per pass attempt, yards per carry, and points per play. They are top 16 in all defensive categories. 8th in points per play allowed, 1st in yards per pass attempt, and 16th in yards per carry allowed. They have the 4th most efficient offense per ESPN, 5th most efficient defense, 72nd most efficient special teams. They are 3rd in game control, 4th in efficiency, 4th in S&P+, 4th in FPI, actually 3rd, just updated after Washington dominated Boise. That pushed Notre Dame down and Oregon up. So they're now third in FPI. And they are third in FEI and have been basically third in FEI for the entire year. This is a national championship contender. They can win it all. They are one of the best teams in America with an awesome head coach in Dan Lanning, with Tosh Lupoy reforming the defense and producing Oregon's best defense in his tenure, future head coach at Cal. Will Stein has constructed an awesome offense, future head coach at Kentucky. They are closer to Indiana, Ohio State, and Georgia than the public and maybe even you watching this video thinks. So again, let me tell you why they're being undervalued here. We already talked about the metrics, so let me just quickly rehash where they are in power ratings. Third in FPI, third in FEI, fourth in S&P+. They are kind of in the same conversation as Texas Tech in most power ratings, where they are not as good quite as Ohio State and Indiana, but they are close enough to them where you could put them in Tier 1. They'd just be in Tier 1B, along with the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Their roster talent is up there. They are fifth in 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite. They have an elite quarterback in Dante Moore, who's viewed as potentially round 1, pick 1 in the NFL draft. They have an offensive line that is a Joe Moore Award finalist. They have a freak at tight end in Kenyon Sadiq. They have Dylan Thieneman at safety, who will be a day 2 player. Insane. They have a veteran, fantastic linebacker in Bryce Betcher. They have an NFL defensive line. It is a unit that prioritizes line of scrimmage, prioritizes big plays. They are fundamentally sound. This team, while I don't know where they are in comparison to last year's team, we'll see where they are at the end of the year. They have reloaded as good as anyone has, outside of Indiana, who lost a fair amount and then got way better. But they have reloaded as good as anyone else. The Ducks have. That is a credit to their staff. That is a credit to their roster, to their players, to their culture. This is a team that, with their elite lines of scrimmage, their roster talent, with a defense that is top 6 in FPI, FEI, and S&P Plus defenses, and with a great quarterback, an NFL quarterback in Dante Moore, who has excellent release, accuracy, poise, who's protected up front and has a deep offensive line, and an offense that showed with Washington they can win and score in the mid-20s and maybe even in the 30s if some plays go a different way while not running the ball well. They have diversity. They have different modes of attack. They kind of have a Swiss Army knife feel to them on offense, in my opinion. And all of those things are boxes checked, several boxes checked, for being able to win a national title. So I'm not saying I'm picking Oregon to win it all. I'm actually not. What I am saying is the idea, and this is what concerns me actually about some of my picks, that Oregon is viewed as that far behind the top 3 teams and even behind Texas Tech with the bye is concerning. It makes me feel like people, much like they were in the preseason after that Rose Bowl, are not taking Oregon seriously. And they are still being very conservative with picking Oregon to win anything of significance. And I think that is a very grand error. We've already seen them win things of significance. Remember, Penn State and Ohio State last year? And I know the Penn State game didn't turn out the way that Oregon or anyone would have expected or even wanted, really. But, I mean, the metrics say they're a great team. They're not going to have any issues scaling with teams. Their talent is awesome, and their lines of scrimmage are fantastic. They're physical, they're fast, they're athletic, they're well coached. Their odds are high in the sports books. This is an elite team, and it's time for the public and everyone to take them seriously. Like, for real. They're not bad. They're not that much worse than the top 3 teams in the field. Another team that is underestimated, but not from a national title perspective, but just from a, program standing perspective. Have you all realized Miami is the flagship program in the ACC? They're number 1 in the ACC, not just in power ratings, not just in recruiting, not just in they're the only ACC team in the playoff, but they're number 1 in program standing. This is a better program than Clemson. It is a better program than Georgia Tech, than Virginia Tech. It is a better program than Florida State. This is the best program with the best staff, with the best team, with the best future outlook in the entire Atlantic Coast Conference. Full stop. They have the most talented roster and the most stable program, and they have the best developmental track record and reputation now, reputation that actually matters, of any team in the ACC. If you disagree with me, that's fine, but I want you to provide me answers as to why you disagree with me. Like, why do you disagree with me? What has Clemson done that's so special, that makes them so deserving of top-tier recognition? Why? Oh, well, Dabo Swinney won 2 national titles. I don't care. Trevor Lawrence isn't walking, he isn't walking through the doors right there. He's not coming to save you. Those first-round defensive linemen from the 2010s aren't coming to save you. And you had some of those guys in TJ Parker and Peter Woods this year. Didn't do anything. You went 7-5. You're playing in a bowl game for a chance to win 8 games. Your least amount of wins since what? Like, Willie Corn was your quarterback? Or when, the 2011-2010 season? I forget. They're not anything special. They've lost their luster. They are like Michigan State, later D'Antonio years. Florida State, later Bobby Bowden years. They're not special. In the same way that Sharon Moore at Michigan was a continuation of what Harbaugh was doing at Michigan on the surface, but in reality it was nothing close at all, and the entire identity and everything about that program changed in a negative way. It is the same thing with Dabo Swinney from the 2010s and Dabo Swinney now. They are not the same person. They are not the same program. He is a worse coach than Mario Cristobal. He is. And this is not a Clemson video. But what I'm trying to say is that when Miami is acing everyone in the ACC in recruiting, in wins, in development, in aliens recruited and developed by the university, they are the number 1 program. When they are tied with SMU and Clemson and reaching the playoffs, and in every other angle, they're beating those guys off the field, and their future outlook is better. They're the better program right now. They consistently recruit inside the top 10. They have back-to-back 10-win seasons. SMU can't say that. Clemson can't say that. No one in the ACC can say that. No one. Only Miami can. They know how to put together a physical game. They know how to attack their opponents. They know how to control and dictate the pace of the game. And that is why they have a 20-4 record. Yes, all 4 of those losses are pretty bad losses, but they also have a win over Notre Dame mixed in there. They have a chance to have a win over A&M mixed in there. They do. They are a great team and great program. And when you have Ruben Bain Jr. and Akeem Mesidor, when you make a hire like Corey Heatherman and turn around that defense in 1 year, when your O-line reloads no matter who's on it, when you can spend the type of money they do at quarterback, you are competing for titles. Who else in the ACC is? I mean, maybe if everything goes right, I could see SMU doing that in the future. Maybe Virginia Tech. Those are all big stretches, though. Maybe Florida State if they right the ship, but until they fire Norvell, I'm not going to say they can do that. Miami is your premier program with elite coordinators, too, and Shannon Dawson and Corey Heatherman, and the cream of the crop in NIL. Few teams can outspend them. Few teams will outspend them. Miami gets, usually, what Miami wants. In the portal especially, in high school recruiting, similar. And, I mean, the aliens they get on O-line, on D-line, it's a thing of beauty, man. I never agreed with Josh Pate and many others when they said Miami had an argument to be number 1. I never really agreed with that. Always thought Indiana was better. Always thought Ohio State and Oregon were better. And now it's pretty clear that Georgia is better. But they have aliens. I mean, that's a fact. They have alien players, and they are one of the best teams in America. Not the best, but they are a top 10 team for sure. And next year, I think they will be. And what helps their case, too, is the ACC is down. Again, what ACC team is competing for a title? National title. What ACC team is going to be a more consistent playoff contender than Miami? You do not have a good answer right now. The answer is none. Miami despite not winning the conference this year, despite not winning the conference in the history of the ACC, in their history in the ACC, and despite their flaws, right now is the premier program in the ACC. It's an awkward place to be in. It is, but it's a lot like Ohio State. You know, they're not Ohio State, but the analogy where Ohio State's the best program in the Big Ten right now, and they haven't won the conference since 2020. Miami's the best program in the ACC, and yeah, they haven't won the conference, but they have the highest punch, the best punch, and they have the most consistent recent history and the best forward outlook. And that is why they're the ACC's flagship program and why Mario Cristobal is building something special there. And as for some other topics to discuss, we got Ohio State fixing its special teams. I'm just going to quickly text someone. Any more super chats? No. That's okay, though. You guys have supported me a lot this year. Okay. Here's why Ohio State needs to fix its special teams. It's hard, if not impossible, to do that in the here and now, because a lot of special teams is just fundamental soundness and coaching. Usually don't correct that over the span of a few weeks or a month. That's a whole preseason new coaching staff process. But for the future, for the long-term benefit of Ohio State, they must fix their special teams unit. It has been so disappointing under Ryan Day. Disappointing to the point where I think it's almost unfathomable how bad their special teams unit has been. Their best season with special teams under Day was 2019 and 2021. 2019 was the last time that they made a 50-plus yard field goal. Ever since then, it's been 40s at best, inconsistent kicking, especially in clutch moments, and that shows a mental weakness of the special teams unit. That's what a lot of special teams is, too. A lot of it is mental. There are some physical attributes, too. Like, they've also lacked, kick power with their kickers. But a lot of it is a mental thing, and they have struggled there. I have had, whether it's Ohio State DG on Twitter, who I correspond with, whether it is, I forget his name, but there's a long-time commenter on the channel, Reginald Phillips, who has been just saying in every comment section, I hate our special teams unit. It needs to be changed. Ohio State deserves a better special teams unit than one that is outside the top 100, that can't kick to save its life in clutch moments, that cannot do anything to benefit the team. It is a bad unit. It is an awful unit. It is a unit that is not worthy of any type of praise. And that's rare because Ohio State, they are the best program in America. They have a top 3 coach in America. They have an elite staff. They have the most first-round picks out of anyone. They're an NFL factory. They're elite at development. And yet we are sitting here and they cannot get special teams right. It's in year 7. So maybe this is just who Ryan Day is and they'll never be good at special teams and never care. But it has cost Ohio State in so many big moments where, think about 2022 against Georgia. Now, I think a lot of that was on Jim Knowles in year 1 and not adapting his personnel, which was bad personnel from the Kerry Coombs days, and not modifying his scheme. And part of it was also on the offense for totally falling apart. But also, yet again, how Jim Knowles was dealt bad personnel. That's not all on him. It's also not on Ohio State that Marvin Harrison Jr. got concussed. Not on him either. But if they had a 50-plus yard kicker, if they were good there, that could have still been a win. Think about 2023 against Michigan. If they had a good kicker, it's a 3-point game on that final drive. and they just have to drive down to kick another field goal. Think about last year against Oregon. Could have won that game if they had a more reliable kicker. Didn't. Same thing with the Michigan game last year. And same thing with the Indiana game this year. Now to be fair, if Ohio State is a good kicker, we don't know if they win all those games, because that's changing one thing for Ohio State. And, it's nigh impossible for you to change one thing that always goes your way and expect teams to never adapt in response. But still, there have been several moments where Ohio State has basically willingly stepped on a bear trap by not having good special teams. They have cost themselves many wins with how they treat that side of the football. It reflects poorly on the staff, too, where the staff hasn't fixed this. It's an obvious deficiency, and yet it hasn't been corrected. Even with new hires, even with Parker Fleming being out, and then bringing new people in or not having a special teams coach, it's still a deficiency. Like, what happened with Jackson Corville? I honestly expected the special teams unit to be better this year because he's made 50-plus yard field goals and he's been accurate. But apparently he's looked bad in practice too, and I don't think Day is an idiot. I genuinely don't think he's an idiot. Like, he is one of the most brilliant minds in college football. He's a tactical genius. So I think if Corville were better, he would probably be starting. So what happened with him? What happened? And having a kicker that is good, or a punter that is good, or a consistent return game is so good, because when you score points on special teams, like touchdowns in particular, your chances of winning increase by unthinkable margins. And think about with how good Ohio State is on offense and defense, where if you just make that one thing even better, well, who's going to stop them? It ultimately puts Ohio State at a disadvantage, not just in the long term, but this year, where Indiana had better teams, and you saw that. Georgia has better teams. Miami has better teams. Every team you will play in the playoff has better special teams than you do. So if it's a close game and it comes down to special teams, all of a sudden you, the Buckeyes, who are more talented than almost everyone, if not everyone in the field, and will be favored over everyone you play, unless a team that isn't, in the first round starts blowing out their opponents and you play in close games, and then by the time you play for the title or whatever, you're a slight underdog. But you will likely be favored over every team you play. You likely will be. I'm very confident you will be. And it comes down to special teams, and all of a sudden you go from being the favorite, viewed as the better team, and rightfully so, to, oh my gosh, they're going to let it slip away again. Like, they're not winning this. And that is such a killer. It really is. And it's something that's so easily fixable. You do not need elite recruiting to have elite special teams. You don't. And all this does is it is an indictment on the special team staff, and it really, throughout the years, it's become clear that bad special teams is a part of Ohio State's identity. It just is. Like, no, they don't give up blocked kicks, but they don't do that because they're talented. That's why. Because they, like, when you're punting and you have all those blockers and you have the coverage guys out there, those are 4 and 5 stars too. That directly translates with talent. Punter and kicker, the positions exclusively, and sometimes even return specialists don't always do. We're mainly talking about kicker here. The development has been poor, the scheming has been poor, the execution has been poor. And that's why Ohio State must fix its special teams, because if they are to be one of the best teams in America, and they want to proclaim that, and they have a claim to that, then they have to make sure they are good in all areas, and they are not good in this area. My heart goes out to Buckeye fans personally who have watched these endless special teams mistakes that have arguably cost their team or made their losses that much more insufferable. If my team, even if I were as spoiled as Buckeye fans are, not from attitude, although that sometimes happens, but in terms of my team almost always wins, but all of those losses came off of, like, just, painful special teams errors, it would wear on me for sure. What should Nebraska's expectations be for 2026? I don't exactly have that answer quite yet. Dylan Raiola just entered the transfer portal. I'm going to mention that when talking about Nebraska because it's breaking live at the time of this recording. But the Cornhuskers fell short of expectations this year. Losing Raiola probably changes things to a certain degree, but we already saw what the team looked like without him, and that was pretty pathetic at the end of this year. It's why Rule made changes that I applaud him for. And it's year 4 in 2026. It's not year 3. It's not year 2. It's not year 1. You got to show something of substance. And that's what I think Nebraska needs to do to succeed in 2026. Do you need to win every game? Hell no. They do not have the talent to do that. Do you need to reach the playoffs or the season is a failure? I'm not even going to go that far. But with this schedule, which is tough, on your screen, non-con games are pretty crappy. But Big Ten games, at Illinois, at Iowa, at Michigan State, at Oregon, at Rutgers, all of those games are losable. Ohio State, Indiana, and Washington at home, all losable. Your only guaranteed wins are Maryland at home and your non-con games. You have a floor, an absolute floor if everything goes wrong. And that could happen with Raiola leaving the school of 4-8. The ceiling, I think, is pretty high. I do. Because I think Rule's recruited well, done an all right job of developing at certain positions and an all right job in the portal. However, winning 8 or 9 games with this schedule would show that Nebraska has something to them. Where, say you lose to Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon, and you lose to, say, Iowa. But you then beat Illinois on the road, and you beat Washington at home. And both of those teams should be anywhere from competent. Washington should be top 25 next year. Or say you go 9-3 and you lose to Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon, who are all clearly better than you, have better coaches, have better programs, but you beat everyone else, including rival Iowa, on the road. That would be a successful season. So that's really what I'm looking at and where I'm going to, bring your attention to is Nebraska as a program is a team that needs to consistently compete for the playoffs before I say that should be the expectation. They need to consistently compete for titles before I will say their expectations should be consistently compete for titles. Nebraska as a program should desire to get back to that position at some point, to be a blue blood and a title contender. And they are a blue blood. They always will be. But until they get there, their expectation should be, hey, win 9 games, compete with the playoffs for it, reach the playoffs every few years, and just continue to linearly improve. It might be insufferable, it might take a long time, but as long as you're improving linearly, you will eventually get to a point where, yes, you are competing for the playoffs every single season. And that's what I care about most is linear improvement here. Don't go 7-5 again. Don't do it. Win at least 8 games, improve in power ratings from last year, especially do a better job on the lines of scrimmage and field a top 25 defense. So your defensive line needs to be bigger, needs to be better, needs to be more athletic. The Huskers' last top 25 defense was in 2024. That is a long time ago. It's a long time ago. So, look, you brought in Rob Orich to fix the defense. He had quick turnarounds at San Diego State and Idaho. You have more talent than those schools do, and you will probably have a pretty big transfer portal budget, I would expect. So get out, get good players, bring back the black shirts, have a competent defense. That will be a step in the right direction, because even with the loss of Raiola, your O-line was horrific. And if your quarterback play takes a step back, but your O-line takes a big step forward with the defense, you will feel the better team, and you will actually fit better in the Big Ten than you did when you had a better quarterback but far worse trench play and defense. Jeep Wade needs to show immediate impact. I will go on a limb very early on and say I think he will show an immediate impact. I think he will come right out of the gate and be successful for the Cornhuskers, and I think Nebraska's offensive line next year will be much better than it was this year. That I know for sure. The other things for now, bit sketchy on, want to wait to see what happens. But Nebraska's offensive line, I think, is in a great position with Cheap Wade. He needs to prove me right, though. Raiola takes a step. This is Oh, I'm gonna have to edit this out. I'm gonna have to edit this out now that I think about it because he just entered the portal. So yeah, I forgot about that for a minute. But I will cut this up and then I will record another segment to pair with it. And that'll make my Nebraska expectations video. Okay, guys. I know that you see the bowl game USC TCU, but I'm on my time limit. I need to get on out of here. Thankfully, we were pretty timely today. I mean, we got like 15, 16 topics done. So that's pretty good. But I do need to go now. So I am going to go. And I will see you all very soon. Thank you all for watching. We will be back Wednesday, noon Eastern time, to talk more about the playoff games, to talk about some more topics.